If you're thinking about building a no-code app on Bubble, this video is going to walk you through everything you need to know to go from blank page to a live functioning application. My name is Gabby Roman and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we teach entrepreneurs how to build and scale their custom applications completely without code. Now, I'm going to help you understand what Bubble is, what it can and cannot do, how to get started. I'm going to showcase some real live Bubble applications, and I'm also going to build completely from scratch a mini app during this video. And all along the way, I'm going to be dropping tips around app security, performance, design, and more. So this way you know exactly what to expect for your app. All right, let's get started. Okay, so what is Bubble? Bubble is an app development platform. You can build, design, and publish real, interactive, and robust web applications completely without code. That's right, you don't need to have any kind of coding or programming background to build a real app on this platform. What you're going to be using instead is a visual editor. And Bubble is full stack, which means all of the important components that you need to build and maintain an application long term is all under one roof. Your database systems, hosting, page design systems, all of the logic to bring features to life, it's all in one place that, these components communicate with each other seamlessly so that you can just worry about actually building the app. And you can build apps as small as personal projects and as large as, SaaS applications for large businesses. This is significantly going to reduce the amount of development time compared to traditional coding, and also keep you in control, right? Because you're actually going to know how the app works. So if you ever need to make changes to the application, as it continues to evolve, you'll know exactly what to do. It's completely in your hands. So this is a fantastic and powerful option for non-technical entrepreneurs. So in thinking about Bubble's capabilities, what types of apps can and can you not build on this platform? Okay, so most Bubble applications are going to be data-driven. In some form or another, the functionality of the app revolves around information that's being manipulated, that's being reported on, that you can search through, that you can display in a certain way, right, that users can interact with. And the data itself can be data that is user-generated. Maybe they're filling out a form and submitting something to the application, and/or it could be information that you are providing your users, right? Maybe you're providing a database of resources that your users need to interact with. Now, I want to bring this into context just a bit here with this traffic light system. Green applications are best suited for the Bubble platform. They're highly data-driven, highly interactive, and these are really common types of apps that you can find here. So we have marketplaces, social networks, dashboards, right, where you can create reports, CRMs and ERPs for businesses, any kind of scheduling or booking tool, tracking of literally anything, right? If you have data that needs to be calculated or time-stamped, tracking those things, really common type of functionality that we find on Bubble. E-commerce applications, right? If you have users paying each other, or if you have users paying you, creating shops, things like that, transactions, very well suited for this platform. Any kind of application that has dynamic forms, so maybe job applications or surveys, quizzes, things like that. And calculators, we often see functionality being built around custom logic to manipulate data and output a custom result for their users. Then you have our applications here in the yellow light category. So these are apps that you can build on Bubble, but you do have other options that might be better suited depending on what you're doing. So for example, media-rich portfolios. These types of applications they tend to be really heavy in their multimedia, right? Whether it's images, video, audio, whatever it is. Bubble does have file storage built in, but if you have a high volume of multimedia, you're probably looking at integrating with an external file storage system anyway. And depending on how interactive the portfolio is, Bubble might be a little overkill for you. You may be just fine using a traditional website builder to display that content. Marketing pages, yes, you can absolutely build those things on Bubble, but that's not really what Bubble is for. There are plenty of website builders that can help you put together marketing landing pages quite quickly. Blogs, same thing. Static websites, same thing, right? You can build these things here, but that's not really what Bubble is meant for. Bubble is really meant for doing more with data that you can interact with. These applications tend to be more for just viewing. And then you have the applications within the red light category here. These are apps that you probably don't want to build on Bubble because they're not going to be supported very well. You're not going to find all of the capabilities you need to pull them off. So for example, games, plugins with any heavy motion graphics or animations. This is really not what Bubble is meant for. You want to use a different system for that. Multimedia editing. So if you're thinking about editing podcasts or editing video, editing images in robust ways, right? For, at the Photoshop level, at the Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere level, creating any kind of motion graphics, that sort of editing is best suited on dedicated systems. Bubble is not really meant for that. You will find some capabilities, some plugins and things that can do basic editing for you, but you're likely looking at integrations rather than using native functionality in Bubble. Also, any kind of computer aided design, so like 3D modeling, that sort of thing. And finally, you do need to make sure that the type of application you're building, if you need to meet certain industry regulations or compliance, that Bubble is actually meeting those things. For example, Bubble is not HIPAA compliant, so you don't want to build an application that is going to be dealing with sensitive patient information. HIPAA is, of course, a US law, but it's good to know no matter where in the world you are. Now, you probably noticed that, those green light applications typically involve real-time interactivity with the users. They have to be on the page, they're typing things in, they're making selections, they're doing searches, whatever it is. But it's good to know, too, that Bubble also supports background functionality where, you can create really powerful automations. So let's say that, a contract was signed and that's a part of your application. You could have database records being updated automatically in response to that. You can email notifications being sent out. Imagine, payments. If payments are a big thing in your application and credit cards are failing or a new subscription was created, right? Users don't necessarily have to be present on the page for next steps to happen. So again, you can create really powerful background automations as well. All right, so now that we've gone through some Bubble capabilities, let's go through some frequently asked questions that might be starting to pop up for you right now. The first is, can I build an app for free on Bubble? Technically, yes, but really if it's just a small personal project. The free plan on Bubble is going to have limits on it. You're not going to have access to what's known as the live environment of your application. You'll only have access to the development environment. And this is really meant to serve as a sandbox for you to get to know the platform and get started and maybe start to do some internal testing. You should expect to move into any one of the paid plans when you're ready to go live, when you're ready to add more capabilities to your application. You're going to connect it to a custom domain. You should expect to move into a paid plan. Okay, and now this brings me to our next question, which is how many users can I sign up to my application, and in general, how many database entries can I have in my app? On the free plan, you are limited to 200 database entries. This includes users. A user is a type of database record. You'll be able to create other types of database records as well. But on the free plan, up to 200 items. When you need more than that, you're going to have to move into a paid plan. Any one of the paid plans, once you're on one of those, that limit is lifted. You have no limit to the number of records you can add to your application's database. Can I design a professional looking application? Absolutely you can. There's no question about that. Bubble is not going to assume anything about how you want your app to look. You do have to come to this with creativity. But the platform is going to have tools for you that you can take advantage of to have fine-tuned control over all the visual properties of your pages. It's also going to come with some important built-in capabilities to make that easier for you. For example, a style manager where you can organize all of your colors, your commonly used colors, fonts and sizes of things. That way you can reuse them very quickly. You're not having to redesign things over and over again, wasting time. Styles are also going to contribute to better performance in your app overall. Bubble also has a powerful responsive engine, which will allow you to lay out your pages in a way that adapts to different screen sizes, from ultra-wide monitors to normal desktop computers to tablets and all the way down to smartphones. So all of these tools you'll be able to take advantage of to create really slick and professional looking designs. Now, with that said, you might be wondering, I'm not very creative. This is a little intimidating for me. How about templates? Does Bubble offer any templates that you can work from? Yes, Bubble does have a template marketplace that you can explore. Depending on the complexity of your application, you may find a template that's really close to what you need, and that can help you get something out the door rather quickly. We tend to recommend building from scratch, though. With a template, you're going to have to modify something somewhere, and that requires time to figure out what you don't need need, undo it, and then kind of rework things to fit your own needs. I promise you're going to learn so much more when you build your own application from the ground up. A template is a fantastic learning resource, of course. You can see, how things can come together, what styling properties are being used to get things to look a certain way. So you do have that option there, but we do recommend building your application from scratch. Can I install plugins into my application? Yes, this is another big yes. There is a vast plugin marketplace that you can explore once you're inside of your app editor. So plugins can add extra capabilities in your application. So you can have more visual elements to choose from and add to your design, such as fancier charts and graphs. You can add more workflow capabilities, more events, more actions. You can also integrate with third-party systems. Now, some plugins are free, some are paid, and it's going to be up to you to do your homework and research, to find the right plugin for your app. Any plugin that you add to your application is a dependency. So you do want to find the right balance of what specifically you have to have in there and what you might be able to create from scratch yourself. Plugins are a great way of creating shortcuts for things, but you don't want to have too many of those. Otherwise, the stability of your app could get away from you. Also keep in mind that the vast majority of the plugins are created by the community. They're published by third-party developers. Most of them are going to be Bubble users themselves, folks who are very familiar with the platform. There are a handful of official Bubble plugins, but again, it's just going to depend on what you need. It is a fantastic place to add additional capabilities, so I do encourage you to explore if there's something that you're not quite sure on how to build yourself, or if you need to integrate with a third-party system. Speaking of extending functionality, here's another question. Can I still add code to my app if I wanted to, right, on this no-code platform? And the answer is yes, you can. There are some places where you can add custom HTML, CSS, you can add custom JavaScript. You can also create a plugin that's private to your application, and that would be a coded solution too. You also have API capabilities that can really open up a lot of doors communicating with the outside world, PHP servers that are outside of your app, things like that. So the capability is there. That's obviously going to be for more advanced use cases. The idea is that you build everything within the native capabilities of the platform so that you don't have to write a single line of code. Okay, this next question has to do with mobile applications. Can I publish my app in the app stores, the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store? Yes, but there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Bubble applications are web applications, which means you access them through a browser. You have to have an internet connection to get to them. Now you can go through a process known as wrapping the application. This would require a third-party service to help you with this. And what that does is it converts your web app into a format that's compatible for those stores. You still need to have an internet connection. It's still technically a web app in order to work with the applications, but that is a way to get them published there. And the second thing is that as of this recording, Bubble is in the middle of beta testing a new native mobile app capability where you can build, test, and publish native mobile apps that will be compatible for iOS and Android devices. It's going to be a whole set of new features within the editor, with mobile components. So if you are interested in creating a native app, you can keep an eye out for that to come soon. Here's another design related question. Can I import designs from wireframing tools like Figma, Adobe XD, things like that? Bubble only has an import capability that works with Figma specifically. It is a bit limited. It will only really work with basic designs, and even then you're going to have to rework things anyway, so that everything is fully compatible, with the rest of your application. We recommend just designing from scratch. If you have external designs, use them as a reference. But rather than importing designs from Figma, just rebuild them from scratch. You're going to learn a lot as you go anyway. You're going to ensure that you choose the right elements for those designs. Sometimes the import will kind of convert things into the wrong element. You'll have to replace them. It's just going to create extra work for you. So short answer is, with Figma only, yes, at a basic level, we recommend skipping that step altogether and just building your designs yourself. Let's talk about exports. Can I export my Bubble application's code? No, you cannot. Bubble applications only work on Bubble. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're making the decision to build on this platform. This is the platform that you're going to stick with. And remember that this platform is not just for, MVPs and prototypes and early versions. If you build your application correctly, you can scale your app for the long term. Just a matter of putting in the right practices in place so that everything is secure, that it scales well. Once you have more users, more activity, we'll be talking about performance and optimization a little bit later in this video. Okay, so Bubble applications only work on Bubble. You cannot export the application to use in a different system. You can, however, export your app's data. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do this through APIs and through CSV downloads. This next question is a really important one. How secure is my application and its data? And the answer to this is really going to require a collaborative effort between Bubble as the platform hosting your app and you as the builder of the application. Bubble is responsible for the infrastructure. Okay, so they're SOC 2 compliant. Your application is hosted on Amazon Web Services, which powers most of the internet's most popular cloud software. They're going to handle a lot of data encryption for you, password management, a lot of user credential management, logging in, logging out, resetting passwords, things like that. And also, there's a number of capabilities around who can actually access your editor, and you can define different levels of permission there. Now, on your end, you're going to be responsible for creating more granular access rights to the app that you've built. So the data records, the functions, the pages, right? Who can and cannot do and see certain things. Bubble doesn't know what you're building, again, so it is up to you to create those rules, to create that logic in your application. So it is up to you. It is your responsibility to not just build those things, but also enforce them properly in your application. Can I collaborate with other people in my editor? Yes, you absolutely can. Now, the plan that your application's on will dictate how much of this you have access to, but in general, you can invite other Bubble accounts to your editor, give them a certain level of permission, and you can work alongside them without actually stepping over each other. There's a lot of version control tools, merging changes, syncing changes, things like that. So if you're looking to work with a partner or even a team of people, this is a great feature to take advantage of. And for our final FAQ, can I really scale? Is it truly possible to build an app completely without code in a way that's going to be long lasting, right? Support a lot of users, data, activity over time, and have it be reliable? Yes, absolutely. We've seen it firsthand. We've worked with hundreds of applications in many different industries. Founders and app builders from all walks of life build applications completely from scratch and turn them into, revenue generating products. The application itself might have been the product. So it's absolutely possible. The thing to keep in mind is that Bubble is just the tool at the end of the day, right? It's a great tool, but it's just a tool. It is up to you to make a lot of important decisions around the logic, around building it in an optimized way. We'll talk about these things a little bit more later in this video, but you do have to come to this with a plan. You do have to come to this with strategy. And you have to understand the concepts around managing data, around creating user-friendly designs, and so on. So yes, it is absolutely possible. And I'm going to show you too by showcasing a few different examples of real-life applications built on Bubble that are currently live. Our first showcase is Ultimate Book List. This is a big directory of book recommendations. I'm going to scroll down here to this kind of list of top personalities. I'll select one person here, let's say Tim Ferriss, and this is going to take me to Tim's profile. If I scroll down here, I can see the various categories of book recommendations that fall under this profile. We can see the 85 recommended books, and these recommendations are coming from sources. That's kind of one of the key things here to create authority over this entire directory. So every single book that we see here has a linked source where we can actually read the recommendation from this person. So maybe it was a social media post, maybe it was published in an article somewhere. So let's check on, one of these books here. I'm going to select this checklist manifesto. Okay, so now I'm in a similar profile, but now it's from a book's perspective. And here I can see all of the different personalities that have recommended this book. So it's going in the other direction here. This is a great discovery platform for book content. So this was all built on Bubble. This application has a lot of functionality that you might find with social networks such as search, right? Profiles. You can have an account to mark your favorites. You can follow. And of course, different linking and navigating between different pages to be able to move the user through and actually encourage the discovery of new books. All right, our next showcase is Interio app. Now, this is an application specifically for the curtain and blind industry. Different users within the industry can use this app, designers, retail, shop owners, manufacturers, and this is really a big project management space. It's an area where folks can manage all of their fabrics in a product library. They can set up different invoices and quoting, kind of build out custom designs for curtains and blinds for different rooms, within their clients. They can manage all of the products, make sure that things are moving forward in their statuses. They can collaborate with other people. You can see there's all sorts of complex functionality here. This has all been built custom to support not just this industry, but also to create this kind of unified working space that otherwise, these users would maybe be using different tools cobbled together to get all of their work done. We can see here in the workshop, we're able to create, invoices and things like that. So this application also has, custom calculators to track all of the pricing of everything. It can export files for the users. This is a very powerful application with a lot of sophisticated features behind the scenes that make it easy for the users to move forward and really be able to focus on their work. Our next showcase here is Planned. This is an application that helps users improve their financial health by exploring their transactions from different perspectives, gather insights to help them make better financial decisions. So I'm going to click through this little demo here so we can get a sense of the functionality here. This application has an integration with Plaid, which allows you to pull in securely transactions from bank accounts, credit cards, savings accounts, things like that. That way the application actually has data to work with. It can output these scores. It can break things down into different categories, help the user understand where they're strong, where they can bring some more attention to reach their financial goals. There's a task management system here to kind of keep all of these activities in one place. There's budgeting tools, kind of present all of the information to the user, be able to extract those insights. We have these comparisons here. And this application also supports having clients or individuals meet with a coach, a financial coach, or maybe an advisor, so that they can collaborate on this data and be able to make decisions from there. We can see that this application has a version that is specifically for those financial professionals that they can then bring to their clients. Our next showcase here is Zoidi. This is a CMMS software that stands for Computerized Maintenance Management Systems. This is specifically for any kind of maintenance system, maintenance environment where you have work orders, inventory, preventative maintenance, technicians that might be going out to a job site and needs to keep track of all of the different tasks and statuses. So here we have, these custom forms that have been designed to take in important details, to track everything, preventative maintenance, so that you have these sort of automated features to, on a schedule, send out reminders that, this particular resource needs to have an update on it. We have mobile maintenance, any technicians that are on the go can update their statuses while they're out in the field. Inventory management, lots of different functionality around these features, uploading files, uploading statuses. Again, a lot of collaboration between users as well. This is very much an application that involves teams. So you have various assignments, different views of all the data so that everybody's on the same page. I also want to mention that all 4 of these applications are bringing in revenue in some way or another. So Zoidi here, let's go over to their pricing page. They're going off of a subscription system, very common for applications, 3-tier system. They can try it for free, right? There's a little trial there to get a taste of it, really incentivize the interested party to get to know the different features, make sure that it's right for them. They also have a demo application that you can tour. Planned also has a subscription system. I believe they have a freemium model, so they do have a free tier where you get access to a basic set of features, and then you can upgrade to get access to more features. Again, very common system. Interio app has sort of a collection of different products, but if we take a look at their pricing page here, kind of the primary offering here is also 3-tier subscription system, as well as with a free trial. Ultimate Booklist is free to use as a visitor. So the way that this app is actually bringing in revenue, I'm going to open up one of these book profiles here, is there are affiliate links to the book on Amazon, right? So if I actually click through to the Amazon page for this book, the owner of this application will get a bit back from that transaction. So this way, it really incentivizes creating a large following of this application while still being able to support the operations behind the scenes. And I will share that all 4 of those applications were built by clients that we've worked with personally. We saw the very early stages of each of those applications. We couldn't be more proud of their work. All right, now let's take a look at how Bubble actually works. What are the concepts? What are the fundamentals that go into building an application? There are 4 pillars to every Bubble application. No matter what type of app you build, you will be moving between these 4 areas constantly throughout your development. The first is the database. The database needs to be structured. It's going to be custom defined by you. You are responsible for creating the tables, the names of those tables, the fields within those tables, how the tables relate to one another. There are a lot of decisions to make to structure the architecture and organization system of your data, because your data, again, is going to power so much of how this application functions. So database is the first pillar. The second pillar is design. What are your users going to see when they interact with your app? And this is more than just the colors and the size of your text. This also speaks to usability. How friendly are your designs? How easy is it for your users to navigate between all of the pages and understand where they need to go next in their flow? The third pillar is workflow. This is where you make the application come to life, right? So if I click on a button, what instruction am I giving Bubble to do from there? Are we sending an email? Are we modifying a database record? Am I calculating something or displaying something new within the design? You know, you can create quite robust functions and sequences of actions just from a single button click. And it's up to you to put all of that logic together. Your logic may also be conditional, right? If the user is an admin versus a guest, what can they do or see from here? So much of this is dictated by the workflows that you build to essentially animate your application. And the fourth pillar is workload. This is going to speak to your app's performance. Workload is how Bubble measures your application's activity and how heavy it is on the infrastructure behind the scenes. Not all activity is made equal. You know, some operations are more lightweight than others, but it is up to you to build the most efficient app you possibly can. That's going to help you have fast loading pages. It's going to make sure that you don't have a more expensive app behind the scenes. So all 4 of these pillars are going to work together, right? And so you're going to constantly be moving between these areas as you make decisions around your data architecture, the logic that you create in workflows, how you design your pages, how you populate things with dynamic information that may change from user to user, all while making sure things are scalable long term. Now I'm going to open up the editor to a Bubble application that I'll actually be using to build out our mini app very soon here. This is to introduce you to the interface. There are many different screens to help you customize and configure your app. So I'm going to point out some of the bigger ones so that you know exactly where to get started. This is the editor for a brand new Bubble application. On the left-hand side, you're going to see 7 different tabs. These are all the different sections that are going to help you build out your app. We're currently within the Design tab. This is your canvas for you to put together your front-end designs for your pages. You can currently see that we're on the index page. There are some other built-in pages here. You can also create new ones, of course. For example, if I switch over to the Reset Password page, this has been pre-configured by Bubble, and I can customize this if I want it. Going back over to the index page, you'll see that we have a blank canvas here. So it's completely up to me on what I want to add to the page and how I want it to look. On the left here, we can see a big library of elements that I can add to the canvas. For example, I can choose a button, add it to the page here, and this property window that shows up will let me configure the button further. The second tab is the Workflow tab, and this is where you can make things happen in your application. You need to have some kind of a trigger, and Bubble has a big library of triggers here. Let's say an element is clicked, and it'll auto-select our only element on the page right now, that blue button. And then I can add 1 or more actions. There's an even bigger library of actions here: account actions, navigation, data changes, and more. So if I wanted to click the button to send an email, for example, I can then configure that action further from there. And note that I'm not writing any code in order to set up this logic. The Data tab is the third tab in the editor here, and this is a bit more involved. There's actually 5 different sub-tabs to help you organize your database structure. Data types is where you set up your tables. Within the data types, you can also set up all of the fields. So for example, I can add a custom field to create a first name field for the user, a last name field, a phone number, a profile photo. It's up to me to custom configure all of the different properties I want in my database. Under the Privacy tab, I can set up what are called privacy rules. This lets me create really granular control over access rights, who can and cannot access data in my custom data structure. The app data tab is actually where I see all of my records that are being added to the database. So for example, whenever a user signs up, I'm going to see a new entry here in the user table with their email address, the timestamp of when they were created, and if there are any other custom fields that I had them submit, then I would see that information show up here as well. So this is where I can manage and view all of the data that's getting generated. Option sets are a fantastic capability here within Bubble where you can manage a predetermined list of choices. We'll be taking a closer look at this a little bit later in this video. And the file manager is where you can manage anything that's been uploaded to your application. So this is different from your application's data entries. We're talking about PDFs, CSVs, images, any kind of file that needs to be uploaded from a device will be managed here. And your application will come with a certain amount of file storage space available to you, and you can always increase that if you want. You just need to modify your app plan to get that extra space. The fourth tab here is styles. This is a really useful section to ensure you stay consistent throughout your entire application with all of the designs. You can see that Bubble has many presets already done for you for all of the standard elements. So for example, a drop-down is going to have this border with that light gray color. The placeholder is going to also be that light gray, but you can modify this, right? You can customize away from whatever the presets are doing, and you can also add your own styles. Styles are essentially presets for design. So you're going to save yourself a lot of time. Again, it'll ensure you stay consistent throughout the entire application. And this is a huge performance helper if you use styles more than customizing every individual element in your canvas independently. You're definitely going to be using both, but get into the habit of using styles whenever you can. This also has another section here called Style Variables, where you can set up all of your commonly used colors and even your application font, so that wherever you are in your design, you'll be able to have access to this palette here for quick access. Plugins is the fifth tab here, and this is where you're going to manage any plugins you've installed to your app. Now, obviously we're not seeing anything right now because this is a brand new application, but I would get started by clicking on this blue button over here where it says Add Plugins. This will pull open a window so that I can search the marketplace. So for example, if I search by the term email, this will show me any email related plugin that's been published to the marketplace. This could be connections to email marketing services, notifications, email verifications, analytics, and so on. You can see that on the left hand side there's a handful of filters to help you really narrow down your search. You can filter by, free plugins versus premium ones, and then these common categories as well. So for example, let's say that I wanted to install, let's just pick one right here, SendGrid marketing emails, right? If I click on install, here, I'm going to close this window. Now I have this one plugin added to my application. From here, depending on the plugin, I might need to configure some general settings within this window, but there's going to be some descriptions, and it'll also let me know exactly what I get from this plugin. In this case, I'm getting some additional workflow actions so that I can send emails through the SendGrid system. SendGrid is an external email service provider. Settings is our sixth tab here, and you can see that there's a lot of sub-tabs that you can work through to further configure your application behind the scenes. I'm going to call out just a few areas that are going to be most important when you're just getting started. This first sub-tab here, App Plan, is the summary of your application's workload usage. And anything else that is going to contribute to the cost of your app. So you can see I'm currently on the free plan, so I get 50,000 workload units. I have up to 500 megabytes of file storage. We can see that I've barely used any of my workload units. This is a brand new application. I haven't uploaded any files. This will also summarize plugins for me, especially since some plugins can be paid. So we're going to see a summary of what my app is costing me on a monthly basis over here. So this is a nice summary so that you're never lost on what your bill is going to be. The general tab here has some general settings around access to your application, password protection, things like that. And I want to point out that you'll see these green messages here where Bubble will let you know if a specific feature is limited to a paid plan, and not just that, but also which plan tier. So the password protection option here is you need to be on the starter plan. This is a first paid plan, whereas the two-factor authentication feature, you do need to be on the growth plan, which is one level above starter. So be mindful of those settings there. And then you have domain and email, which is where you can connect your application to a custom domain. You do need to be on a paid plan for this as well. And that way you can white label the URL. Once you have your domain in place, you'll also be able to set up your email. So all of these other tabs are going to speak to very specific areas of the application behind the scenes that you will at some point want to go through all of them to make sure that everything is configured exactly how you want it. The Logs tab is where you're going to be able to monitor your application's activity. We will dig into this tab in a little bit more detail later on in this video, but you'll find that in this App Metrics sub-tab, we have some charts here so that we can see how much workload our application is consuming on a monthly basis. You can change the time frame to get more granular if you're trying to inspect something, trying to optimize and really drill in, right? I can actually click through to this chart and it'll continue to break it down for me. Again, I don't have very much activity in this app quite yet, but we'll come back to this to see this with a bit more variety in here. But this is all metrics around usage in your application. And this is an important section to be mindful of as your app continues to grow so that you ensure you're building the most optimized application possible. The server logs area is essentially a running log of every individual activity, who triggered it, what time everything happened, what related records were involved. You get a lot of information here. This is super helpful for troubleshooting if you're trying to figure something out. And whereas the app metrics is more of an aggregation on that activity. All right, so those are the 7 sections of your editor. I do want to call out one thing that can be very helpful to get in the habit of using when you're first getting started, which is notes. I'm going to show you an example here within the data section. See how there's a little comment icon next to the type name for this user table. I'm going to open this up and you can see that I can write in a note. This little panel opens up here for me. So I'm going to say, this is my first note for the user data type. It's just an open-ended, multi-line input here. If I close this, now you can see that that icon is filled in, letting me know that there is a note. Okay, so if I click on this, I can get back to it. Let's go over to, for example, the privacy area, just to show you. You're going to find this icon in multiple areas within your editor. So here is another icon for this privacy rule. So I'm going to say, here is some info. Okay, we're going to close this. Let's go to one more section. Let's go to the design. Let's add that button back to our page over here. Notice in the property editor, I see that icon again. So be on the lookout for this icon because you can add notes to almost anything throughout your entire editor here. This is my note for the button. And you see how in the upper right corner, it's keeping track of all of my notes. If I click on view all, it will list them for me. I can click on one of them. It'll take me right to it. So that's a handy way of kind of documenting internally important notes that you want to keep in mind, just things to remember, especially if you're working with other people. Now that we're more familiar with the interface, I'm going to walk through in real time the creation of a sign up and login feature. This way you can actually see how the database, design, and workflows all influence each other. Let's take a look. So I'm also going to be modeling after this inspiration image here so that we can follow along. If you're not super comfortable with design, or if you're not really sure where to begin with your layouts, it's always helpful to take a look at these inspiration sites to get some ideas. I'm on Dribbble with 3 B's, and I just search for generic terms sign up form to see patterns and trends across modern sign up form designs. And one thing that really stood out to me was a lot of these have the form on one side and then the image on another side. Whether the image has a testimonial or some marketing text, maybe some screenshots of the application, there's some differences there. But layout wise, that's what is being designed, across many of these images here, that left and right side. So we're going to mimic the same approach here, and I'm going to be using this as my example image. So we have something to follow along with. So the first thing that I'm noticing is that there's a very clear 50-50 split in this particular image with the left and right side. And I also really like kind of how this is rounded. And I think what I want to do is have this entire design centered on my page rather than having it take up the entire page. And I'm thinking about, ultra wide monitors. I don't really want things to be stretched out too much. So I'm actually going to have one primary container to keep things centered on my page and then split that container into 2. Okay, this is one of the first things that you'll want to address, is just kind of wireframing out your sections so that everything falls on a grid. So I'm going to add my first group to the page here. This is group A. Let's rename it to, let's call it group main. And I'm going to limit the width, right? You see how it's stretching out to the full width of the page? I'm going to limit this with a max width of 1000 pixels, right? So it's shorter now. I'm also going to center it horizontally. Okay, my page itself, or my canvas, is 1200 pixels. So there's a 200 pixels extra, and now they're on either side of, that extra space is on either side of this group. Okay, I'm also going to change the height of this main group. Let's get rid of this height to content. And for now, I think I'm going to max it at 70% of the page. Just for now, I might come back and change this because I want to be able to see kind of the boundaries of this group more easily to start. Let's actually center the group on the page. Let's go to the page level, center the items inside of it. That's really just this one group here. Going over to the appearance tab, I'm going to change the roundness to 20. I'm also going to give this a solid border like that, right? So now I have my primary container in the very middle of my page. Okay, now this group is going to contain my left and right sides. Okay, so I'm going to change this layout style to a row. That means that everything inside of the group main, kind of the first elements inside of it, are going to stack horizontally. And I want that to create my left and right side. So I'm going to add another group. This is going to be called group left, like that. And I'm going to change the width to max out at 50%. Right, there's the left side. And let's also vertically stretch the height of this group. Okay, so there is my group left. Now I'm going to copy and paste to have a group right. That's pretty much already set up. I just need to rename this here, group right. Let's actually spell it correctly. There we go, group right. All right, so now we have our kind of wireframed sections for our content. If I preview my page here, I'm going to see that center group. I don't actually see the left and right side right now because they don't have any kind of background or anything yet, but this is where my content's going to live. Okay, so I'm actually going to, compared to this image here, I also have an astronaut image. They're looking the other way, so I'm going to reverse the side so that they can actually be looking at the form. So I'm going to change this group left to have a background image. Let's go to the background style, image. Let's upload an image from my computer. Go over here, this. Great, and note that there's now a URL here. This is actually pointing to where the file lives in my application's file storage. If we jump over to the data tab under the file manager, you can see there is the image that has been uploaded to my app. All right, now you can make other adjustments to the image here. You have a few different settings. I think what I want to do is center this so that I have a bit more negative space here to add some text. If we look at our inspiration image, I've got some white text here with a quote, so I kind of want to do something similar. Let's get that text in there now, actually. So I'm going to add a text element to this group. Notice how it kind of auto positioned itself to the upper left corner. That's because my left group is a column layout, so it's going to start at the top, and also more specifically really that it's top aligned. So I'm going to move this so that it is bottom aligned, and at the text level I'm going to have it horizontally place itself to the right of its container. So it's over here now in the bottom right corner. Let's actually change some appearance properties so we can see the text. Let's make this white. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. Let's go with 24 pixels, and I'm also going to change the actual content. This is sample text for the featured image, like that. You can also, type in your own numbers here. You're not just limited to what you see in that drop down. All right, so we have some text here. I kind of want this to be raised a bit, so I'm actually going to go into the layout settings for this text and create some margins. So maybe, let's say 70 pixels of margin to push it up, and then on the right side, perhaps 20 pixels to push it over. I'm noticing that the text is left aligned within the boundaries of the text element. So I'm going to come over here and right align it. Okay, so that's a little closer to what I want, right? That's good enough for now. Okay, so now let's go over to the right side. Let's take a look at our inspiration image, see what we have here. We have this sort of header. I've got some primary text, subtext, login button, some inputs. Everything here is falling in a column. What I think I want to do is actually take this header and actually move it out of the kind of center container and make it more of a page header atop the top of the screen here. That way it can be a little bit more uniform with later on in other areas of my application. There's always going to be kind of a top header expanding the full width of the screen. So I'm going to add a group that is going to sit on the top and outside of this main container. We're going to call this group header. Okay, now I want to call out a couple of things. Notice how this group is further down. It's not actually at the top of the page, and it's very close to the main container. There's no separation. So that's because at the page level I had centered the content within it. I'm going to change this back to top align like this, and I'm going to add some gap spacing to create some separation. Let's do maybe 100 pixels to push that down a bit. I'm also going to change the height of the group header to at least 50 pixels just to give it a bit more room. Okay, and now you can see, because this is outside of that primary group, the width of this is different. It's able to stretch out the full size of the page. And we can fine tune this further as we develop the application further. But this is for now how I want to leave things. So I'm going to add some text inside to be a placeholder for my app name, right? App name goes there. Let's make this bold. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. All right, and we'll also center this. I believe I want my group header to be a row, okay, so that everything inside of it stacks horizontally. I don't want anything stacking vertically. This way, now that it's a row, I can center this vertically inside of that. And we have a drop down for the language. They've got a little flag in there. You can definitely get that design. I'm going to keep this a bit simpler here. I'm just going to use a standard drop down element where I can display the text here. But you can definitely custom create your own drop-down with images as well. So I'm going to add just a couple of choices, English, French, Spanish, something like this. We'll have it default to English, and I'm going to remove the placeholder. I do see that there is, this border around it. There's a lot of roundness there. So let's create roundness of 20 pixels, and it's already got one of our preset style colors or style variables there, so I'm going to leave that as is. I do want to make it a bit taller, so I'm going to come into the layout, give this a height of, let's say, 40 pixels. Okay, and we're also going to center this in the group, and you see how they're hugging each other, they're right next to each other. I want to separate them. I actually want the app name to stay there with a bit of space on the left hand side, and then I want the drop down to go all the way to the right. So I'm going to go back to the header group, and I'm going to select this other alignment style here where they're spaced out, right? They go to the very edges. Anything else that gets added to this group will just be evenly distributed inside. Now I also want to add some padding to this header. So I'm going to add, let's say 20 pixels on either end, right? Just so that it pushes them in a touch. Okay, so now let's refresh the page just to see where we're at here with our design, right? Now we've created this sort of header frame that can carry over to the rest of the application. We could have navigation up at the top, menus, things like that. All right, so I'm going to move on from here, right? There's our drop down with our languages. I noticed that we have some conflicting corners and with the roundness of that main group, right? You see the roundness here, but the image, it has some hard corners here. There's no roundness on that image. So I'm going to come back into my group left, go into the appearance, and I'm only going to modify the roundness of this group on the left side. So I'm going to define each border independently. Let's change the top left to 20 and also the bottom left to 20. Right there. Now we have, oops, did I do it? Let's see. I didn't actually select it. There it is. Now we actually have more seamless presentation of that image. Let's refresh the preview here. There we go. That's a lot better. I think I want to lower this text just a little bit. I'm going to take down that bottom margin to maybe 60 pixels, just a little bit. Again, I could spend all day fine tuning this here, and this is something that you want to be very careful with, and I'm definitely guilty of this, is, when you're first getting started, do not spend too much time making everything pixel perfect, because, you can always make tweaks here and there. Your priority should really be on getting functioning features. You need to get those things to work. So if it means keeping things a little simpler to start so that you can get to the workflow part, the actual logic part, do that. You will always be able to fine tune and make things pretty, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how good it looks, right? So your priority should always be on getting your features functioning. All right, so now let's take a look at the right side. In this case over here, it's the left side. So we have a primary text and a subtext. There's a little bit of spacing. I can see there's more spacing between these items. So we're going to have several containers here to control spacing just a bit. Let me add a group. You'll see that I'm constantly going to group elements to control my sections. So we're going to call this primary and sub. Just for my primary text and my subtext. Okay. You also notice that I'm labeling everything as I go. That makes a world of difference when you are designing a page, especially one that's going to have a lot of visual elements. You don't ever want to get yourself lost or mixing things up. That can have a big ripple effect, especially once you get workflows in play here. Okay, so this is going to contain my two texts. So let's add the first text in here. What are we saying? This is saying, hi there. Cool. So we'll say, hi there. It's going to be nice and big, like this. All right. Now, this is one of those things where you definitely want to take advantage of your styles because, they're there for a reason. They're there to help you just in a single click apply, sizing, colors, any other visual appearance properties without you having to select them over and over and over again, especially if you're, creating a lot of different elements with the same styling. Okay, I think I want to do, yeah, we'll leave that there as is. So we're going to use that heading 1 style for this text. I'm just going to center it, and I'm going to copy and paste to create another text. I'm using my keyboard shortcuts for that, Control C, Control V. And our subtext says, welcome to the app. Welcome to the app. We're happy you're here. Okay. And we're going to change the heading or style to the smaller one here. I think I actually want to do one that's not as bold. Let me see if I have anything like that. I don't think I do. Let me change this back to heading 6. I'm going to actually override this so that it doesn't have as heavy of, the styling there. I'm taking down the weight of that text. There we go. Now this group, I'm going to add some spacing between those texts. They're a little bit too close together. So at the group level, I'm going to add gap spacing. Let's say 10 pixels apart, just to separate them a little bit. Okay, now I'm also going to, I'm just going to copy this group just to kind of serve as a little template here for my next thing, which is the actual form, I believe. I think I want everything here in this next form. Yes, I'm going to have the button, this or text, as well as my inputs. So we're going to rename this group to group form. And I noticed that the separation there is a little bit more, so I'm going to change the gap spacing here to 20 pixels so that they're spaced out a bit more. Also at the group right level, notice that these two inner groups are right next to each other. Let's also add some gap spacing there. We'll do 20 pixels as well. Okay, so first thing we have is our login with Google button. Okay, so I'm going to add a button here. I can get rid of this text now here, and this is going to say log in with Google, and this button is going to be an icon and label, and I'm going to change the icon to a Google icon right there. We're also going to change the appearance of this. Here I'm just going to override everything, but this would be another use case to set up a style for a button. I'm going to actually get rid of the background color, and we'll just have the text be colored here, as well as the icon with one of my color variables like this. All right, I'm also going to have a roundness. I'm going to do a 10 roundness rather than 20, just a little bit more subtle here. And let's see where we're at. Do we have a border color? Let's add this solid color with our same text variable. Right, it is coming along there. Now notice in the inspiration design here, the width of the button as well as the inputs and the login button here, they're all even, right? Even just kind of how far the primary text here is going. I'm gonna replicate this as well so that we have that consistency there. So this button, first of all, I'm going to remove the fit width to content. I don't want it actually to be as wide as the content inside of it. I want it to stretch as far as it can within its container. So its most immediate container is the thing that's going to stop it. Okay, in that case, it's this group form, which its parent is group right? So everything kind of trickles in terms of widths and heights as well. Now, I don't want this hugging the very edge of group right. So what I'm actually going to do is take group right and create some padding. This way I don't have to add individual margins to every single thing inside of this group. The padding will just kind of take care of everything inside of it. So I'm going to add, let's do maybe 40 pixels, 40 pixels on either side to kind of push that in just a little bit more. Right, you see that shading there? That's bubbles showing me where the padding is. Okay, so we've got our group. Now I'm going to add some text here so that we can do that or text. And I think I want this text moved inside of my group. Notice how I'm picking it up and I can move things around inside the elements tree here. I can drag and drop. I can also drag and drop here. I can also use this next previous to shift their position. All right, so this is going to be my or text, and I'm actually going to change this to my normal body style. I'm also going to add 2 shapes. What I'm trying to do here is replicate this design here, shape or shape. That's what we're doing. So I'm going to have 2 shapes. Let's say a lot more narrow in terms of its height there. They're 2 pixels, and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to grab from here. It's hard to kind of right click on that one. It's very, very tiny. And then grab it from here, paste. Okay, so you see, because the shape or shape are all inside of this group form, which is set up as a column, I now need to create another group to separate them off as their own row. This is something you're going to do a lot, is using containers to help you mix and match your rows and columns in your grid. So I'm going to multi-select the two shapes as well as the or. I'm just holding down my shift key. And I'm going to right click and group them all in a new row container. It's kind of a shortcut doing it that way. And now I'm going to center them all. Let's open up the elements tree. This is kind of easier way to select everything. So the shape is going to be centered, or is going to be centered, and shape B is also going to be centered. And at the new row level, this new group level here, I'm going to center them within that group there. And I can add some gap spacing. Let's do maybe 10 pixels to separate them, just like that. Okay, so now I've created this similar design here. Let's refresh the page and see where we're at with that kind of separation between our social login, and then our inputs are going to go down below. All right, one thing I'm noticing is that we're kind of close to the edges up there at the top of the group. I think I want to come back to my group right and also create 40 pixels of padding in the top and the bottom, right? So we can push all of that in. I think that's going to be a little bit more comfortable for us. I think I also want to increase the row gap spacing between my primary text up here and then the form down below. So I've added 40 pixels there, maybe 50 will be. Obviously, I'm eyeballing everything, but just trying to kind of, as you make these tweaks and stuff, you'll probably go back and forth to adjust these different settings. But just know where, the key is to know, where you want to make those changes so that you can have the biggest effect with the least, properties being adjusted. There are many ways to accomplish the same design. Some are more cumbersome than others. I could have added margins to every single individual element, but that's a lot of clicking. It's a lot of, there's room for error when you do that. So by going to the outer containers and forcing this consistent spacing through the padding, I now don't have to worry about, setting up left and right margins on the button, as well as this text and as well as this text, things like that. Okay, so now let's move into adding our inputs. So I'm going to add a single line input here. I'm just searching through my my assets, and I'm going to just kind of drop this in here, and then I can reposition this after the or group. This input, let's see, what is the height of our button? That's 50 pixels. Let's actually fix this to 50 pixels tall. That way my inputs can also be a fixed 50 pixels. We're going to remove the width so that it expands to the same width as everything else. I don't need this minimum in here. All right, so this input is going to be for the email address. So I'll type in a placeholder so the user can know what to type in there. We're going to tell Bubble that this is an email format. There's some special properties around email, so it's good to let Bubble know that. I'm also going to copy and paste this input. Now I can set up my password input, and password format. All right, and then we can add our button for the login. So I think, is that the next item? Oh no, we have our forgot password here. Let me add another text. I'm going to grab this text here. Actually, we'll grab this one to kick us off. So this one's going to say forgot password, question mark. All right, going to go into the layout and have it right aligned horizontally. Also change the color so that it stands out a little bit. Maybe we change the weight to a slightly heavier weight again. All right, and now I'm going to grab this button, copy and paste it down below so that we have our login. So this is not going to be an icon and label. It's just going to be the label to log into the application. In our inspiration image, this is more of a heavier accent color on the button to really call that out as a primary action. So I'm going to do the same thing. Let's change the background style to our flat color with our darker text color variable, and the label itself will return back to white here. Okay, let's preview something. I know I'm already noticing something happening here, which is the height of the right side is not expanding with the content within it. So we can make that correction. I believe this has to do with the fact that I set the main container to 70%. So now we're going to update that so it can actually fit to content a little bit better, but it looks like things are coming along here. All right, so let's go back to group main. I'm going to go to the layout, and I'm going to now remove this max height setting, and we'll have this fit to content. Okay, so now it's just going to be as tall as it needs to be to fit everything inside of it. So that should be more comfortable for us here. There we go. Cool. All right, I think we have one more element here, which is don't have an account, sign up. Okay, so I'm going to copy this text down below. We're going to center this here. Don't have an account, sign up. And because this is one single text, and your one color will apply to the whole thing, notice that they've got a split color here. What I'm going to do is come into the rich text editor. Actually, let me change the primary color to, let me move this down here, to this darker text variable. And then I'm going to open up the rich text editor and highlight the sign up and override the color just for that highlighted part like that. And then I get that same effect. Now I could have used two separate texts and put them in a row group, similar how I did a row group here, and then be able to control their colors separately that way. That would have been perfectly fine too. Okay, so I believe we have now replicated this login form. Yep, right, pretty much. Obviously, we can fine tune things like, the colors and stuff when you hover over, any other spacing and things, but here we go. All right, so what I'm going to do now is create the sign up form, and then we can connect the logic so that the accounts are created and we can actually log in. We're not going to hook up the Google form or the Google flow just because that requires an integration. You can absolutely accomplish that, but we're going to stick with the email and password for this demonstration here. So because I already have a group that has a lot of the components I'm going to need for the sign up, I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to rename this group to group login. Okay, and this is going to be my default group, and we're going to have some logic here so that the user can switch back and forth between the two. So I'm going to take the entire group, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to select the right group so that when I paste it, it pastes inside, and paste it here. Okay, so I'm never going to see them both at the same time, but in my canvas, obviously, I can show them both at the same time if I want to edit them by looking at them both here. Now my copy, I'm going to rename this to group sign up. All right, so what adjustments do I need to make to the sign up group? Well, I would also want to offer the ability to sign up with Google, so I'm going to change the label here to say sign up. And I want to make sure that, yes, Bubble automatically renamed my button so that I don't mix them up here in the workflows. And then here, now I have two email address inputs and two password inputs. I'm going to rename them. Very important, again, so you don't mix things up in your workflows. So I'm going to call this login for the email, and same thing for the password. This is login, and down below for sign up, and for password, we have our sign up. And for the sign up specifically, I'm also going to add an additional password input so that they can confirm and we don't run into any typo mistakes there. So let's go back up here. We're going to move this over, and we're going to call this input password confirm. And this is for the sign up form. All right, so this is also going to be set up as a password format, and I'm just going to change the placeholder to say confirm password. That way the user actually knows, why is there a second one? They know what to do there. Right, we do not need the forgot password for the sign up form, and this button is going to say sign up, and then down below we're going to change this wording here. Let me open up the rich text. Actually, let me do it from the text box. I think this is easier. So here we'll say already have an account, and then our text will say login. So this is just going to be the reverse so that they go back to the login form. Log in, like that. Okay, so now we have our two groups for our two functions. So now we're going to move into actual functionality here. Let's start with just like switching back and forth between the two groups. I'm going to take the sign up group, going to go into the layout, and I'm going to turn off this setting here. I do not want it to be visible on page load. Okay, so the login group is the only thing that's visible on page load, as we see right here. Notice that there's now this extra white space because of that group that's hidden and it's taking up that space. I can correct that by collapsing the height, basically collapsing the entire dimensions of that element when it's hidden, which it is right now, right? It's not visible on page load. So let's refresh this. Okay, that way we don't have that extra white space. I also want to make sure that, when I'm on that other group, that this doesn't create extra white space. So let's go over to the sign up group. I'm going to do the same thing, collapse when hidden, but I'm going to leave this checkbox checked for the login so that it is visible on page load. This is my default group. So now I'm going to hook up a workflow for these texts. When the user clicks on don't have an account, I want to hide this group and show this group. So we're going to add a workflow, right? When this text is clicked, I'm going to go to element actions and I'm going to hide the login group. So here's where, the labeling is very helpful. This is my group login, and I want to show the sign up group right here. Okay, and we're going to do the reverse with the other text. So I can help myself by copying this event and pasting it and just swapping out the elements. So I'm going to search for my text already have an account. That's going to hide the sign up group and show the login group, right? You'll get more comfortable with those little shortcuts and, copying and pasting things, swapping things out to help you move a lot faster. So let's refresh the page here. Okay, so we have our login group, click on this. Now we have our sign up group. Click on this again, it switches back. And we can tell because the wording is changing, right? The sign up group has that extra input. You notice what's happening, the image is resizing itself a little bit, and that's because it's adapting to the height of the overall container here. Because our sign up group has an extra input, it's a little bit taller, and therefore the image is resizing itself so that, it's proportional, we don't have any distortion of the image. That's just kind of happening automatically. All right, so now let's set up the actual workflow for signing up. I think I want to do that one first. Email, password, confirm password. So we're going to go to the sign up button, add a workflow, and we're going to go to an account action called sign the user up. Bubble is going to ask for some required values to be filled in here. We can see they're required because they're highlighted in red. We also can see that there are 2 issues that are coming up in this issue checker. It's a very helpful tool here to make sure that you're configuring things technically correctly, right? Bubble doesn't know what you're building, so it's not going to know, any specific visuals that you want or specific values. But because we've added a sign up action, it's only going to work if I fill in the email and password fields because those are required. So that's why Bubble is kind of letting me know, hey, don't forget to fill those in. All right, so for the email, we're going to map the value of the email address input, the sign up version, right, to this particular setting here. So the inputs value. I'm going to do the same thing for the password, and I can search for my inputs to narrow those down. Input, password, sign up, right? Got to be careful not to mix these up here. Signups value. I'm mapping those values to these fields so that Bubble knows to save those values to the right place in the user account. Now from here, I can do a lot of other things. I'm not going to address these right now, but you can actually we are going to use this one. You can send an email to confirm, make sure that they actually own the account. They'll have to click on a link. That way Bubble can internally confirm them. You can also adjust other values for the user. When you set up custom fields within the user, you can say, for example, their name, their photo. It also doesn't have to happen in this one action. You can come back later and modify the existing user record to save other details. So you could have, for example, a multi-step creation process. For now, we're keeping this simple. We're just going to do the bare minimum, email and password, and we're also going to go ahead with the password confirmation. So I'm going to insert the input password confirm, right, and put that value, map it to that setting there. All right. Now, after the sign up has occurred, I do want to let the user know that it worked. Without anything else happening here, it's going to look like really nothing went through for the user. We need to give them some sort of visual cue. So I'm going to do 2 things. First is I'm going to reset the input. That's going to clear out all inputs that are involved in this workflow. The second thing I'm going to do is add a little alert message. Okay, we're going to say, this alert message is at the top of the screen. I'm going to position this to the top. This is a special type of element that is hidden by default and is only shown through a workflow action. I'm going to make sure that the background of this is fully opaque like this, and we'll change the, just changing the styling of this a little bit. Font color to white so that we can actually see it, and I think I want to have the background color match that text here. All right, so I'm going to say, you are signed up. We'll probably come back here and make an adjustment as we go later with the rest of our mini app. But for now, this is just a visual cue to let the user know that this was successful. So in the workflow, I want to add another action. Under element actions, I can show that alert message. And you see here that here's the timing that I can control for that alert. It's going to take half a second to fade in. It'll stay on the page for 2 seconds and half a second to fade out. All right, so let's test this out. Let's actually sign up a user now. So I'm going to switch over to my sign up form, and I'm going to say jane@sample.com. Put in a password, test, sign up. All right, we see a progress bar going. There's my alert, and I can also see that all of my inputs have disappeared, or the values have disappeared, so they were all cleared out. So if I go back into my app data, for my user table, there's my brand new user that was created. I'm never going to see a user's password here. Bubble encrypts that, it keeps it away from you, but we do see the email address. Okay. Now, I also want to hook up the login form. Okay, so let's go over to the login button here. We're going to start a new workflow, and very similar to the sign up, we'll choose the login action, and we have to provide an email and a password so that Bubble can go check the credentials, make sure they're correct, and mark them as logged in. So here we're going to insert the email logins value, and here we will map the password logins value. Same thing, I also want to reset the inputs just to let them know. And let's go ahead and show the alert message as well. You know, ideally, you're probably redirecting them, navigating them to a different page. Again, for now, we're just going to show an alert message. So I'm going to actually change the message because the alert element is designed the exact same way I want it. Rather than having two elements, I'm going to use the same one, but override the message to say you are logged in, like that. Okay, so let's test out that login. So here I can do jane@sample.com, test, login. Now I'm logged in. If I try to log in as a user that doesn't exist, let's say john@sample.com and some password, log in, I'm getting a system message that's saying, hey, we can't find an account with those credentials. All right, there we have it. Now we have a functioning sign up form and login form so that moving forward from here with our mini app, we can actually run things as a proper user. All right, so now that we have a sign up and login feature, I'm going to build off of that and move into my mini application. I'm going to be building a time tracking tool for an individual. The user will log into the system. They'll be able to manage clients, projects, and add time entries for each of those projects. That way the application can keep track of how much time they've spent, and then they can send an invoice to the client so that they can get paid. So we're going to start with data structure. Because so many features are driven by data, you want to make sure that you have the right fields in place, relationships between records, basically all of that architecture to work off of. Many of your designs and your logic are going to need to reference your data types and fields anyway. So it's a good idea to come in here and organize your data needs as much as possible. You know, this isn't kind of a one and done thing. You'll always be able to come back in here and make adjustments as you go. That's very expected. You certainly can't anticipate everything you need from the beginning. But give it your best shot because it'll allow you to move in a more efficient manner throughout development. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating all of the different data types that I know I want for this mini application. We've already got the built-in user type. I'm going to create a new type for project. Okay, I'm also going to create a type for client, as well as one for invoice. These are the main data items that I want my application to work with. And a good rule of thumb is if you think of all the important nouns that you would encounter when you're describing user flows, that's usually a good sign that you want a separate table for it, right? My users will log in, they will be able to manage clients and set up projects for each client. They're going to be creating time entries. That's another one here, time entry, to each project to be able to send an invoice to the client, right? Generally, if you can think of those important nouns, that way you can organize your tables properly. Now, once you've created your data types, you can go in and set up the fields within those types. So for example, for our user, maybe we want to collect a first name from them, and this would be a generic text value. Okay, so you're going to define the format of the field. Okay, so we'll create the first name field. We might want a last name. This is also a text. You can filter it down by searching this way. And let's also say we have a profile photo. Profile photo, this will be an image for the format of this value. Okay, image right here. Right, so it is up to you to set up the fields and the proper format. The format does matter because that's going to dictate kind of what operations are available, in some cases what visual elements you can use to reference these things. You can always come back in here and change the labels of your fields just like you can with the data types. The only exception is the user type is built in. You can't change the name of it, nor can you delete this data type here. Okay, so let's do some similar things here with our other data types. So our client is just a standalone table. You can kind of think of it as, creating a CRM. So we want the client's first name, which is a text, client's last name, also a text. Let's say that we want to capture the client's email address, right? These are not people who are logging in. They're more of it's a directory, an address book for ourselves. This is, again, a text here, maybe a phone number for the client. Okay, phone number. And phone number, you'd think that it's a number, but you don't do math with phone numbers, and that's really what you want to reserve the number type for. So the text is really all you need. There are different formatting for phone numbers, international numbers, codes, the plus character, things like that. So a text is going to be most appropriate for that one. Okay, so some basic information to store for the client. Now for the project, we might want to have a project name. Okay, so this is going to be a text. These are values that are describing that project. We want to have a project deadline, for example. Let's say deadline. This is going to be a date, like that. We'll also want to have a project status. Now, this is a good use case for an option set. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to this tab here. I'm going to skip over the guided setup. I'm just going to click that button right there. And I'm going to set up my first option set, which I'm going to call project status. Okay, and an option set is a way for you to manage a list of predetermined choices. These are not choices that your users can control, but it's a list of choices that you'll likely need to reference multiple times throughout your design and your logic. So I'm probably going to need to work with the status in many ways, right? To display it to the user in a table, for example, maybe to reference in order to create conditions, maybe show something that is archived versus active, or have a workflow go down a certain path based on the status. So I know I'm going to reference this multiple times, so I want to create a shortcut. This is kind of like a reusable type of data element where I'm always going to be consistent with the different status values. So let's say projects can be in a draft status, active, maybe archived. So now that we have this option set created, we can go back to the data type for the project type and create a new field called status. And the field type is going to be that option set that I just generated, right? That I called project status. Now, one thing that I like to do actually for option sets, I actually like to give the name a prefix OS so that it's easier to identify, throughout your design that this is referring to an option set and it's not just, a data type or a field or anything. So now that I've added that OS there, you can actually see more clearly that this is an option set value, right? For any given project, the status field is going to be one of these three choices that I created here. And when you go to create a field, you can see that OS there. I personally like that to be able to identify option sets separate from your data types more easily. Okay. Now, the project is always going to be tied to a client. So here's another kind of special type of field format. We're going to create a new field called related client. This is another kind of tip where having some prefix, some indicator that your field is going to be a relationship to another record. Okay, the field type here is not going to be a text. The value for this field is not the client's name. Instead, it's going to be a reference to a client record. So here I'm actually choosing the client a data type, and that tells Bubble that the value of this field is a reference to a client record. Through the project and through this particular field, I will be able to get access to all of the values within the client, not just their name, not just their email, but the entire object, right? The entire record here. So that relationship is really important. Now, I could go over to the client side and create the relationship on the other end if I wanted. I could have here related projects, plural, right? Because a client could have more than one. The type being project to be linked to a project record, and marking this as a list, so that we know that this field can have more than one project. This is a one-to-many relationship, whereas this is a one-to-one relationship. Now, the nature of your application and the amount of data that you're dealing with is going to help you make decisions on whether it's necessary to create this list field. You want to be careful with list fields because you don't want to have a list that has thousands and thousands of items. It increases the overall size of the record. And really the one-to-one relationship is all we need. So we don't want to create some inefficiencies here. Technically, Bubble will allow you to save up to 10,000 items in a single list field for any given record. you don't really want to be anywhere near that. I've never found, a use case where you're getting huge benefits out of a very, very large list. Usually, if that's happening, you probably need to break things down differently in the rest of your data structure. So there's a lot of strategy around, where things are saved, how you create relationships, but just pointing out here that at the moment, we're going to have a two-way relationship between our project and our client. Now, coming over to our time entry, we're going to have several fields here to keep track of time spent. So we're going to have, well, first of all, the related projects. So we know, which project we've been working on. Whoops, this is going to be related project like this. I don't necessarily need to relate this to the client as well. As long as I have a relationship to the project, I therefore have a relationship to the client. Again, another kind of strategy point in some use cases, it may be helpful to be a little bit redundant there to create some shortcuts, more efficient pathways to information. It just depends on the types of features and functionality you're building and the logic you need. But I'm going to leave it with just the relationship to the project. I'm also going to have a start time field for when the time entry has begun, and this is going to be a date value. Dates will record both dates and times. Now you can manipulate dates and times in many different ways, where maybe you're only working with the date component, only the time component, but technically we're going to have a date and a time here, even though the name of my label is start time. We're going to have end time for the other side of things. This is also going to be a date format, just like that. Let's see, we're also going to have a calculated value that we'll calculate through the workflows. Bubble doesn't have field types that are calculations, right? Setting up a field type as any kind of like an automated thing, that doesn't exist here. Any calculated value would have to happen through a workflow, and you can save that calculated value to the data record. So I'm leaving room for that. So we're going to have a calculated duration, and this is going to be, let's say that this is a number. We're going to say duration in minutes. Okay, so we'll normalize any difference between start and end to minutes. Okay, let's do one more thing here. Let's say that the user has a rate, right? An hourly rate for how much they want to charge. This is going to be a number, and notice that I'm saving this at the user level, right? Because the rate really describes the user. It could be that the user wants to provide a different rate per client or even per project. So this is just a matter of what you want your app to do, and that can help dictate where it's most appropriate to save certain fields. If I want the user to be able to change rates per client or per project, then it would actually be more appropriate to save the rate at that level, because if every project's going to have a different rate, I need to look at the project, not the user. But if I have like a standard rate, then I want to save that at the user level, so that no matter what project, no matter what client, we can always go back to the user to find that standard rate. I could also have a mix, right? In some cases, the standard rate could be the default, unless specifically given for a project, I want to provide a different rate for that. Okay, so these are they're decisions that are going to be dependent on what you want the application to do. Now, given that there is a rate somewhere, the time entry can also calculate the cost of that entry, right? How much are we going to earn from this time spent on the project based on the rate and the duration? So this would be another calculation that we would do in a workflow. So I'm going to call this calculated cost, and this is going to be a number for that. Okay. Now let's go over to the invoice. So the invoice is kind of joining a lot of these things together. So we're going to invoice the client. So I'm going to say related client, so we know who to send the invoice to, like this. I also want to have all of the time entries that I want to add to the invoice. So this is going to be a related time entries, plural. This is going to be a list. And maybe an invoice has one, maybe it has more than one, but I want to allow for multiple. So that's why we're making this a list here. So this is going to be related to my time entry type, just like that. And maybe some other fields to help me sort of summarize everything within the invoice. So total duration, like this, in minutes. Note that, typically with time tracking and, invoicing clients on projects, we're probably going to be exceeding 60 minutes. It's likely going to be hours. But by normalizing everything to a smaller unit, I can standardize everything behind the scenes so that my calculations are a lot easier. just because it's in minute in the database, right? It's in that format, doesn't mean that it's always going to be in minutes in the design. I can reformat things for the front end design so that it's more friendly, it's easier to understand. I can convert it to hours if I want on the front end. So again, another piece of strategy here is just to think about like what's going to be the easiest format and structure for the entire application, so that you're not having to do as much math or as much converting overall. So here we're going to do number for total duration, and I'm also going to say total cost like this, and this is going to be another number. So this would be the sum of all of the individual cost values for each individual time entry. All right, so that total cost is essentially the amount that we're invoicing the client. We could also have an invoice status. Let's actually create another option set here. Statuses are common use cases for option sets. So I'm going to say OS invoice status. It's a new set. And let's create some sample statuses here. Let's do a draft invoice, sent invoice, paid, void, right? Common statuses that invoices can be in, and then go back to our data type and set up a new field that can now tie itself to one of those choices. So we'll say status here. We'll link this to the invoice status, right? So any one invoice could be one of these different values there. We can also collect other details such as, when we sent the invoice, because the creation of the invoice, which would typically default to a draft status, may not be, it's likely not going to be the exact same date and time as when it was sent to the client. So it could be helpful to know, hey, it's been this long since the client has had it and it's not been paid, for example. So sent timestamp is what we can call this field here, and this would be a date. So when the invoice is first created, right, and let's say we want to default all new invoices to the draft status, this would ensure that Bubble saves that value, automatically, and it can be changed. That this value will be empty to start, and that's okay. It's okay if it's empty. It's only when we actually trigger the workflow to send an email with a file, things like that, would we then update this field to timestamp that precise date and time, so we know. And then you can design things on the front end to calculate the difference between this date and the current date and time, right? The present date and time, to know how much time has passed for that. Okay, so if you notice that what we're doing here is we're not working with any specific data entry. What we're doing is setting up the structure of all of our tables. The fields are actually columns in a table. If you look at our app data here, and we go over to, let's do the clients as a simple example. Notice that, we've sort of transposed everything, right? Every field that we defined for the client is now a column header. So if you're more familiar with, traditional spreadsheet designs, things like this, right? Every row is going to represent a different client, and every client's going to have an email, first, last name, and so on. So we're trying to structure the column headers of our table per data type. Once you have this structure set up, you can technically also create records manually. Now, most of the time for, especially for the type of app we're building here, we're going to want everything to be generated through our workflows, through the, designs that we're creating on the front end. But you as the admin actually have control over these tables as well. So I can come in here and manually create a new client now that my structure is set up. So I can call this client at sample.com. We can say client Smith. Like this, we'll create a phone number, and we'll create it without any projects, no slug or anything here, right? So now I have a manual entry for my first client in my database. If I want to go over and create a new project here, okay, I can set up a project tied to that new client. Let me actually change the search field, the kind of lookup field for the client record. I want to search by the email address for the client. Okay, so setting up a new project, I'm going to link it to my client record, and we're going to call this project ABC. We'll give it a deadline of, let's say, January 1st, 2025 at noon, and we'll say that this is an active project. Okay, so we'll create that there. Okay, so now I have a new project record that I've created manually. Again, this is not generally anything that's going to be powering your app. You're usually going to have your user who's logged in triggering workflows within designs to create records dynamically and pull in values dynamically. But now that I have this dynamic record, I can see how those values would start to fill in my tables from this perspective here. This is a relationship, right? The related client. So I can click to view the related entry. It'll show that pop up for me. So it gives me some context there. I want to point out one other area here, which is the privacy tab. Now that I have data types set up, I can set up privacy rules to ensure that the only data I could ever possibly see when I'm logged into this app is data that belongs to me. So for example, under the project data type, I'm going to create a new rule here called owner. Okay. And I'm going to create a rule that basically says I'm only allowed to access project records in the system that I created. So when this project's creator, this is a built-in field, Bubble will record the user that generated the record for every single data type. Okay, so when this project's creator is the current user, then I'm going to allow that user to view the details of the project in question, right? This is set up for the project specifically. So they can view all of the fields within it. They can find that project in searches. They can view any files that are attached. This is related to creating private file access. Whereas anyone who falls outside of that rule cannot access. So this is where you'd want to intentionally deselect. I always like to create privacy rules so that you give access, and then the everyone else default permission is going to prevent the user from accessing. Okay, as long as the project's creator is the current user, then they can access that project detail. And you can set this up with all of your data types. And you can get really specific with your expressions. It just depends on the fields that you've set up in your structure here, because you're essentially doing comparisons of values of those fields. So is the project's creator the current user? We're comparing two users with one another. Creator is one user, current user is another user. So if they're the same, then we're going to give access, because that tells us that, okay, the current user is actually the owner of this project. And that's why I labeled it this way, right? And you can actually create multiple rules. So if you have an application that has different levels of permission, different user roles, right? Here's the rule for the admin. Here's the rule for the employee. Here's the rule for the guest. So you can give people maybe search access, but maybe they can't actually view all of the fields within that record. Maybe they can only view the name and the deadline, but no other details, for example. Right? So you can get very specific. It's a powerful area that allows you to create global access rights. These are going to apply to the entire application. If somebody falls outside of this, those projects that they can't have access to, they will never show up in a search result. Right? They won't be able to access it by manipulating any code behind the scenes in the browser. It is quite important for you to create these server-side restrictions so that users cannot get access to your data. Very, very important here. Especially if you have an application where users are creating their own data and that information needs to be separated from one another, which is the case in this example here. Some other user that has their own set of projects, their own set of clients, we don't want those items to bleed within the other's dashboard and their own experience. They should only be able to see the stuff that they've created. All right, so now that we have the data structure in place, now we're going to wireframe the front end design. We're just going to start by creating the pages we need in the app and setting up a global menu system. Let's take a look. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is set up a new page to get started with my wireframes. I'm going to click on add a new page. We're going to start with our clients page, right? So the user can manage their clients. And I'm actually going to clone this page from the index because there's some components that the index has that I want to keep. That way I can save myself a couple of clicks. I don't have to set them all up all over again. So let's click on create here. Okay, so my clients page is getting created. So we can see now this is my custom page here, and it's essentially a copy of the index. So I'm going to make some adjustments to make it more appropriate for the clients page here. I'm going to get rid of the left group, the right group, and I'm going to be left with just this main group. Now I want the styling of my inner pages to be a little bit different from the index. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color of the page itself to a lighter gray. And then I'm going to give my main group a background color of white, just to create a subtle separation of background and foreground. I'm also going to remove the roundness. I'm also going to remove the border. That color separation is enough for me to see that, that difference there and really the boundaries and the space that group is taking. Let's also remove the fit height to content. So there's my group. Also going to go to the page and reduce the gap spacing a little bit. Let's change it down to 20 pixels. Okay, so I have my header at the top and then my primary container for my content to live within here. And this is really going to be kind of the framework for all of my pages, so there is consistency throughout the entire application. Everything is very familiar for the user no matter what screen they're on. Okay, this header, I'm also going to give this one a background color of white. And we're going to add some menu items here so that we create a navigation system. So let me add a new text to this group. We're going to call this clients. This will be our first menu item. Now I actually want this to be a lot closer to the app name. I don't actually want it, you know, in the middle of this here. And as I add more menu items, they're just going to be spaced out throughout the entire group. And I don't really want them. I actually want it to be closer to the left side. So I'm going to multi-select the app name as well as this first menu item, and I'm going to group it in a new row. This way I have more control over the spacing between those elements, right? And then this second group that I've created, I can have this fit to content so that we can see, you know, again, within the header, which is defining that padding on the left and right side, the header is set up to align things with space between the outermost elements. So in this case now, the outermost element is the overall group, which is on the left side, and then the other outermost is the drop down, which is going to stay on the right side. But now that I have this group, I can fine tune things within it. So I can add some gap spacing here, let's say 20 pixels, so that there is still some separation between those inner texts. Okay, all right, so let's set up these menu items. I'm going to center that. Let's make this a little bit bigger here, maybe an 18 point. Okay, and I'm going to create all of my menu items. I'm just going to copy and paste a handful of text here and just rename them. So we're going to manage our clients, our projects. We have our timesheet. Okay, we have our invoices and also settings. You know, if I want to change my password, change my email for logging in, things like that. Okay, so here is our menu. Now this group I believe needs to be centered as well. Let's pull this to the middle. There we go. That's much better. Okay, so this is a good starting point here for just like the general sort of template for all pages in our application. What I want to do now is actually create a reusable element out of this group. Okay, a reusable element out of this group. This way, I don't have to rebuild the menu every single time for every page. And if I wanted to make a change to any part of the design, I only need to do it once. I'll show you what I mean here in just a moment. So I'm going to right click on this group and I'm going to convert it into a reusable element. This is essentially creating a global element that I can use on any page. So we're going to call this header. Okay, and I'm going to say create. Now it's going to take me to sort of a standalone place in my editor specifically for this header, right? I'm no longer on a page. So I do need to make a couple of adjustments here. You can see how things have sort of collapsed. I'm going to set the default builder width to 1200, and I'm also going to change the background so that it is white again. Some things need to be reset just a little bit here. Okay, so there's my header. Now if I go back to the clients page, okay, I'm going to get rid of the original header that I had there. And now I'm going to replace it with my reusable. You can see at the very bottom here, let me actually collapse all of this down so you can see where this lives. Okay, for my assets, we have a section for reusable elements. Here's my custom header I created. So I'm going to select that and just add it to the page. So now you notice when I hover over this, everything's kind of shaded. I can't edit it directly here anymore. I have to go into the editing page for this specific element. And when we're on a page, it's kind of like you have a page on a page when you design a reusable element onto a page. But the idea here is I don't need to go into every individual page to make a header change. I can just make the adjustment from the one reusable element. So let's go over and duplicate. Let's go to add a new page here and create our projects page. We can really see this reusable in action. And I'm going to clone this from the clients page. Okay, so just from cloning, I've saved myself a whole bunch of steps, right? It's the exact same. I don't need to worry about the main container or the colors. Now that this is it, I'm pretty much done, right? Because the reusable element lives here. It also lives on this clients page. If I go into the reusable element and let's say I wanted to change the color of this text here to this brighter blue, okay? And I go back over to the clients page, notice it's changed here, and also over to the projects page, which, yeah, we're switched over, it's changed there as well. Okay, one place will have a ripple effect everywhere. Okay, this is not the same as if I go into clients and I have a button inside of this group. It's not like that button's going to show up on the projects page. These are two separate pages, but the reusable element is something that is shared across both pages. Okay, I'm spending some time on that because it's a really important element to take advantage of for consistency, for reducing errors. So wherever you can find a use case for it, definitely take advantage of it. Okay, so let me remove the button here. All right, so now we're going to add a couple more pages to match our menu here. I'm just going to be clones of everything. So we have timesheet here. This is going to clone from anyone, either clients or projects. They're the exact same. Good, and then let's do invoices. Okay, and this will clone as well. There's another way to create clones as well. You can go to the edit menu of any of your pages, create clone this page, and it'll have it automatically selected. Another shortcut, and we'll also have settings here. Okay, so I have all of my custom pages creating in my application. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to help the user understand what page they're on when they're looking at it, from the front end preview by bolding the specific, menu item. So we're going to go into the reusable element here, and I'm going to add a condition on this text. Okay, this condition is going to say only when the current page name is clients. Okay, just type that in. Then I'm going to change one of the visual properties, which is to bold it. Okay, it's a conditional scenario that changes the visual property only when this is true here. So I'm going to right click, copy this condition, come over to projects, paste the condition, and just swap out the value. When the page name is projects, and this page name is just matching exactly how I've labeled it here, with the actual page name and the property editor for each page. So they've got to match exactly, otherwise they won't be passing the condition. So here we have timesheet, this, and here we have invoices. And we have settings. Like that. All right, so let's see what this has now allowed us to do. Let's start with the client's page. I'm going to preview here. Okay, so you can see how the client's text here is in bold. If I manually modify my URL here, let's change this to projects, just to load that second page, you can see that this is now in bold. I'm not actually able to navigate yet because I haven't created a workflow for it yet. So let's do that next. So back into the reusable element, we're going to go to the client's text, and I'm going to add a navigation action. To go to a specific page in my application, we're going to go to the client's page. Wherever we are in the app, if we click on this text, that's where it's going to take us. Now I can copy and paste a few times to get all of the rest of my navigation actions in place. Okay, so I'll just switch this to invoices, and that's going to take us to the invoices page. We'll switch this to projects, and that will take us to the projects page. Switch this to settings page, and finally timesheet. Go to the timesheet page. All right, so now I've hooked up my navigation, so let's refresh the page here. So now if I click on timesheet, it's automatically going to take me to that page. Notice that the condition kicks in. Go to settings, go back to invoices, right? So all of my navigation is working exactly as I've designed it. Okay, so now the user can actually move through the application through the front end. We can also set up the app name here in the header to take me back to the index page, right? So we can do navigation, go to page, go to the index. That way we kind of go back home. It would also be a good idea to have, a log out button for the user to formally log themselves out and also get redirected back to the index. That can show up over here. Let's add that actually to our menu. So I'm going to add buttons. So you see how I'm making modifications? I don't have to worry about having to make these changes on every single page. I'm just doing it in one place and it'll reflect automatically for me. So we're going to say log out. Let's change this to an icon and label. And let's see if we can find a log out icon. Out. Yeah, how about this one? This. All right, and how about we maybe reverse the positioning of the label? I think I want that icon to be to the right of the text. Okay, let's choose a different style, maybe this outline button so that it's not so strong there, and we'll center it. And I do want to have this on the other side of the drop down here, and so I'm going to group them together, put them in a row container. Okay, we'll have this fit to content, and I'm going to separate them here with some gap spacing, just like that. Let's see, the height of this drop down is 40 pixels. So I'm going to have this button match that, 40 pixels. It does look like the roundness of the drop down is a little different from the button. That could be a little bit kind of confusing. It's sort of setting off a weird vibe, a weird design vibe for me. So I'm actually going to have the roundness of the drop down match the button instead. So it's a little different from the index. So this one is going to be, we have a roundness of 5. I'm going to do the same thing for the drop down. We're going to change this to a roundness of 5. There we go, a little bit more consistent there. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the page here. Okay, so here's my logout. I haven't actually hooked up the logout button, so let's go change that, add the workflow here. And this is going to trigger a logout function, which is important, right? We actually need to tell Bubble to log the user out of their session. And at the same time, I'm also going to redirect them back to the index, right? So now we have a multi-step workflow here. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the page and log the user out. So it'll take me back over to the index. So now from here, now that we've got all those pages set up, I can modify my login flows and my sign-up flows to take me inside of the app rather than showing that alert message. Okay, so let's remove that from there. I'm going to instead use a navigation action to take them to, let's say we take them to the timesheet page. Let's say that that's maybe the kind of the default page to navigate to. So I'm going to refresh the page here and let's log the user in. We had jane@sample.com. Test is the password. Log in. We know they're logged in successfully, otherwise we would have seen an error message. This is just my browser telling me I'm using a not good password. I'm just using the word test there. So it's taken me inside specifically to the timesheet page, right? So I know that I'm in the system now. Now I do want to take a moment to touch on some responsive settings as well. Let's come back into the index because this will be a good way to demonstrate this. If I switch over to the responsive view here in the design canvas, I'm going to be able to simulate what my designs are going to look like when the screen is more narrow, right? If we go into more of a tablet or a smartphone. So there's a lot of things kind of collapsing automatically, but they're not really that user friendly, right? What I think I want to do is after a certain point, I want the image to go away. I actually want the left group to hide so that we prioritize the form. And after all, that is the most important thing here on this screen. So there's going to be a point where it starts to get uncomfortable because things are just wrapping too much. Things are too, I'm going to have to scroll more. Maybe around here, right? You can see the page size is 712, perhaps around the 700 breakpoint, or maybe even before this text starts to wrap. Let's see where that might be. That is over here. It's a little bit wider. So how about we go for 930 pixels. We switch this so that the right side is the only thing that shows. So on group left, I'm going to create a condition that says when the page width is less than, let's say less than or equal to 930. Okay, I'm just typing that in. Then I'm going to hide this group, right? The visibility is going to go away. And on the layout tab, I want to make sure that the content actually collapses, that we don't actually see, that empty space there. Now, what happened when I did that was this group here, the group right, shifted over to take its place because remember our main group aligns everything from left to right. So now that the left side went away, this is moving over to fill that space. So what I'm actually going to do is have the alignment of the main group be center. And I might want to make a couple of other adjustments to this main group so that we don't have these borders hugging the edges of the pages. I'm going to come into the margin setting of the main group so that it always maintains, let's say 50 pixels of margin on the left and the right side, right? There's always going to be that space there. So you see, let me close this window here. When I'm wider than 930, I'm going to see the full design. As I move down, right, at some point it's going to switch over to the more simplified design. And there's also going to be a point where you still see that things are collapsing here, and this is because the right side has a minimum width of 40 pixels, so it's allowing the design to kind of get really squished down. I'm going to change this minimum width to a much wider design. Let's say maybe 300 pixels, right? That's my absolute minimum. That's as small as it can go. And that will, be fine for, mobile devices once we're at, for example, 320 here. We'll still be able to see things quite comfortably. Now, I am noticing that the padding is a bit excessive now at 320. So you see I'm having to make tweaks, as I test different breakpoints. And that's just the nature of, creating these precise designs. It's all very possible to have a very professional looking design, but it may take some tweaking here. Bubble is going to help me by, showing me how things adapt. A lot of things will happen for me, such as things collapsing on top of each other, text shifting around, things like that. What I'm going to do is, I think before, or at the same break point, that 9:30 break point, I'm going to get rid of the left and right padding for the group right. So I'm going to go back to that main group, where was it? It was on the left group. Let me go back to the left group here, and I'm going to right click, copy this condition just to save myself a couple clicks, go into the right group, paste for the conditional expression. And I don't want to hide this. I just want to remove the left padding, right? Set this back to 0, as well as the right padding. Set this back to 0. Okay, so now you can see what's happening here. Let's remove that for a moment. Okay, there's the full design. As it narrows, we have more space to move within, right? So it's not so crowded. So I'm going to jump over to the preview window here, and I'm actually going to make my browser window smaller. Okay, so we can actually see what this looks like from, the front end, not in the editor. So here's the full design. And again, note, and I'm on a fairly large monitor here, so wider than 1200 pixels, but note that, the center group is not expanding. It's maintaining that maximum width of 1000. But as I make things smaller, eventually we see the left side go away. Okay, well, that should happen. There we go. And then the right side is taking up the rest of the space. It's centered. It's presented very nicely there, and it continues to compress, down to more of a mobile size. So everything's very comfortable here. We're not, nothing's stepping over each other. Nothing's getting cut off. All right. So as you can see, at the end of the day, you are building a custom design. So the more disciplined you are with your grid, your rows and your columns, if everything is falling very naturally, very cleanly in rows and columns, then the responsive design is going to get a lot done for you. You still need to go in there and tweak things because Bubble's not necessarily going to know that you want certain things to collapse or hide in a certain way. So it is very important that you do check those things as you go, so that it does look great on any device. All right, so now it's time to build some functional features on the pages that we've wireframed, referencing the data structure that we put together earlier. Okay, let's jump in. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm on the clients page right now, and I'm going to walk through a set of functionality to help me manage clients. I want to be able to create, read, update, and delete my clients. These CRUD operations are really the core of all data management. So I'm going to start by giving my user the ability to create a new client by entering in all the details that we have organized in the data structure, their email, their name, and their phone number. Okay, so we'll have a group to hold all of those different inputs. Okay, so this is going to be called group create client. And I'm going to expand the height of this just a little bit to give myself some breathing room as I'm looking at it, just 100 pixels here. And I'm really going to kind of draft this out first. I'm just going to grab the elements that I need so that I have something functional, and then we'll be able to kind of reorganize it and polish the design a little bit. So I'm going to add a text here to serve as my first input label. This is going to be for the client's first name. Okay, and then we'll add an input. Right below it, this group is set up as a column structure, and I'm going to leave this without a placeholder and just kind of leave it blank there. The reason I'm adding a text to go alongside this input is I want that text to serve as a label that's always going to be visible. As soon as you start typing into an input, the placeholder is going to go away. So this is more of a user-friendly kind of tactic here. Okay, so this input, I'm going to make it a little bit taller here. All right, and the text for this, I'm actually going to apply one of my other styles for this. I think I want a small title. It's a little bit bigger and it's bold, so that's what I want to use for my form that I'm about to create here. So now I'm going to take these two elements, just multi-selecting them and grouping them inside of a column container. Okay, so they're going to be in their own group, and I'm going to have that group fit width to content, and I'm going to create a little bit of spacing between them, let's say 10 pixels here. Okay, so now I have the first element for my form, and I'm going to rename this to first name, like that. Note how I'm naming everything as I go. That's going to be the best habit to get into. Okay, so I'm going to copy that grouping, and I'm going to be able to set up a little bit faster my next input. So this is going to be group last name. Okay, this text here will be last name, and I don't need to change anything. Input for the placeholder or the format for the input, it's going to be the same. They're both going to accept text. I do need to make sure that I have labeled these, however. Input last name and input first name. Okay, and now we're going to set up another one for the email address. Okay, so going through here, most of this is just labeling for everything. So here we have our label, email address, and for the email specifically, I am going to change the content format to the email format, and we'll rename this to email address. And then finally, we're going to have our phone number. So I'm going to copy and paste this here, phone number. Bubble does have a special format for phone numbers if you're in the US. If you do need to work with international numbers, you probably want to leave this just on text. So I'm going to change it over to US phone, and I'm going to set the input name to phone number. You can also, by the way, rename things over here on the left-hand side. Okay. Now, I don't actually want my form to be in a vertical format like this. I actually want it to be horizontal. So I'm going to change the layout to a row style, just like that. I'm going to add a little bit of gap spacing here with this group. This is the kind of the group client, the outer group of all of these individual input groups. Right, you see how I've collapsed that down there. Okay, so for group client, I'm going to add gap spacing of 20 pixels for each of these columns. And we're going to add a button over here so the user has something to click to create the new client, just like that. Okay. And we're going to have this button be centered. I think I actually want all of my groups. I'm multi-selecting here so I can make this change in a bulk setting, center those vertically. I'm also going to have this group overall just really fit height to content. So I'm going to remove that minimum 100 that I had earlier. Right now it's a little bit more precise around all of the boundaries of these elements here. Okay. Now you notice how this is very much hugging the boundaries of my primary container, my main container. So I'm going to come back into my main container and I'm going to add some padding. I'm going to do 10 pixels of padding all the way around just to create a little bit of a bumper there. That's probably something I should have done with all of my other pages so that I had that same template. Now I know, but that's the change that I'm going to make for that one, just to give a bit of breathing room here. Okay, so I now have a form that the user can fill in and click on a button to create a new record in the database. So let's set up the workflow for that. When the button is clicked, we're going to run a data action called create a new thing. The thing we want to create is the client, right? Bubble doesn't actually know what it is we want to create, so we have to choose from our custom data types. Notice that the user is not here because user is a special data type. You're going to use a sign up action to create a new user. So creating a new thing, we're going to create a new client. I'm going to add all of the fields available to me within the data structure. I'm actually going to remove the related projects. That's not really relevant here right now, so we're not going to be defining that. But all of these fields I can map to my inputs now. So I'm just going to search for my inputs, just typing in here, input email addresses value, okay, first name, input first name's value, just mapping everything, just like I did with the sign up. Same thing for last name here. We'll do the same thing for the phone number. All right. Okay, see how important the labeling is? It makes your workflow setup a lot easier because you're not having to guess which input you're working with. I'm also going to reset the inputs so that it clears everything once we're done. All right, so let's preview this. Now we're not going to see any indication of a list of clients on the page because I haven't designed anything, but we'll be able to check our database. I'm not really liking how this button, this is very picky, it's going to bother me. That button's sort of not very well aligned within the group. I think I actually want to change this so that it is vertically aligned at the bottom of the group that contains it. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the page here and let's create our first client. We're going to create Alex Hamilton, Alex at sample.com, and we'll give Alex a phone number. You see how that phone number formatting is happening for me? That's because of the format setting that I gave the input. All right, create client, click on the button. You see how the input's all cleared out. That's the only visual cue I have for now that the record was created. So if I jump over to the data tab and over to the app data sub tab, I can now see in my clients table, I have this new record that was created. Alex at sample, Alex Hamilton, there's the phone number. Okay, so now I have a way to create new records. Now I want to be able to show that to the user. Show the list of clients that they have here in a table. Now there's two ways to go about this in Bubble. There's two elements that you can use to work with dynamic lists. You have the repeating group element and you also have the table element. As you can see, as of this recording, this element is technically in beta. I think it's stable enough to be using in features like this. So I'm going to go ahead and use this because this comes with a lot of great capabilities to create a standard, looking table. Repeating groups are great too, for this sort of thing. For a traditional sort of spreadsheet-like table, there's a little bit, there's a couple more steps that you need to take for a repeating group to get there. A repeating group is a bit more flexible in terms of working with dynamic lists in general, not just table designs, but other list designs. For this, I only need a table, so that's the element that I'm going to use. So I'm going to add this to my page, and they're side by side, so that tells me that my main container is in a row setup. I'm going to change this over to a column, and let's move the table down below the form, okay, just like this. I'm also going to add some gap spacing in my main group here. Let's add some 20 pixels of separation. All right, so my table is kind of pre-configured to have, a traditional spreadsheet sort of design. So there's a couple of adjustments that I want to make right from the beginning here. I'm going to remove the fit width to content so that it expands to the full width of the group here. And I know that I have 4 values that I want to display. So I'm going to want to add at least one more column. So let's right click over here, add a column to the right. Okay, next thing I want to do is for this row 0, that's going to act as my header. So I'm going to make this row sticky so that it's always at the top. If I have a big list of clients, it's always present there, right? If I'm scrolling through items, that header won't go away for me. And I'm also going to change the background so that there's a bit of separation just in terms of coloring here for the table. Okay. Now inside of the table, I'm also going to add some text to display the column headers, basically going to match the form that we have up at the top. So I'm going to take this first text that says first name. I'm just going to change the color. Okay, and basically within the table, you see how, this is made up of a bunch of cells. Every cell is essentially its own container. So all of the settings you've been seeing so far in terms of layout styles, alignment, spacing, you can implement at the cell level. So I'm going to change the layout alignment for this cell to be centered. And I'm going to go to the text and also center that vertically within the cell. I think that's going to be cleaner for me here. Okay, so I'm going to copy this text and place this into all of these other columns, and I'm going to multi-select the other columns as well and center them just for some quick editing there, and just rename the text here. So this is last name. This is going to be email. I could have also copied and pasted the items up above, but this one's already set up with the right coloring and everything, so I'm going to leave this as is. Okay, phone number. Now, the rest of the table is going to populate dynamically based on what's in my database, right? I can't anticipate how many clients any given user is going to have. So you see how there's this little infinity sign here next to the 1. That means that this is a repeating row. Everything that I design in this first cell is going to repeat for all of the other rows, for as many rows as we want the table to generate. And that's going to be based on the data that I have in the database. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do for this row, I don't want it to be fixed to 3 rows. I want it to be dynamic. Okay, I want as many rows as we have clients in the database to appear here. Next thing I'm going to do is at the table level, I'm going to define the data source, right? The table is an element that works with dynamic data. So I need to give it a data source. Where is it going to find all of the clients? Well, my database. There are other sources, you can pull from plugins, API connections, other values that you may have in the app, but the database is the most common one. So I need to tell Bubble, hey, this is going to be a table of clients, and the data source is going to be the result of a search of my client table. So I'm going to search for clients, and I'm going to sort by their, let's do their first name, okay, so that it's in alphabetical order by first name. Now I'm not going to add any constraints to this, but keep in mind that, I only want my user to see clients that belong to them. So one thing I could do here is to say, as long as the creator, right, the creator of the client record equals the current user, that's one way to ensure that I'm not seeing anybody else's clients. But remember, this also can be done through privacy rules. And we're just on one page here. If I had a search for clients on my projects page, on my timesheet page, the privacy rule is going to catch all of that. Okay, it's certainly not a bad thing to have this constraint in here as well, but you really want the privacy rules to be your first layer of defense for protecting access to data. Okay, if you don't have the privacy rule, you would definitely want to make sure that you have these constraints within the individual searches. All right, so I'm going to remove this constraint because I do want to demonstrate the effects of privacy rules in a moment here, but right now we're just going to search through clients that are in the system altogether. Okay, so I have a data source now. I'm going to take another text here and place it inside of the repeating cell. You see how it duplicated for me? This text is going to be dynamic. Instead of a static text that I've typed in there, I'm going to insert dynamic data and insert the current row's client's first name. Okay, this is a dynamic expression. It's kind of like an instruction that we're giving Bubble to go find the record that is being referenced in this row and insert the value within that first name field. Okay, so I'm going to change the style that I want to use for this. We're just going to work with the regular body style. I'm going to have this centered, and also with this one, I think I'm actually going to leave it left aligned. Let's see if we can add some, just a little bit of a margin to push the text away. There's, again, many different ways to create spacing and distribution. I'm kind of roughing this out right now, but I'm going to add, let's say, 10 pixels to separate it from the edge of the cell. All right, so I'm going to copy this text and place it into our other cells to complete the table. This expression should be referencing the client's last name. This one is going to reference the client's email address, and this one over here is going to reference the phone number. All right, and you see how, the expression is now moving the text into 2 lines. That's just going to look that way for the editor. If the length of the expression is actually longer than what the actual values will be, and you want a bit more of an accurate representation in your editor, you can also take advantage of the placeholder here. This is just for you within the canvas. So I can replace this with email address. It's just a placeholder. It's just to kind of clean up the look of everything within the editor itself. It doesn't actually change the expression. I can do the same thing over here with the phone number if I wanted. Okay. All right, so let's actually preview this. I'm going to refresh the page here now that we have a table in place. Okay, so we have those 2 clients in the database. I've got the data filling in. Now, if I were to create a new client, let's say George Washington, george@test.com, and give them a phone number, create client. There we go. Now we have a 3rd row that automatically appeared, right, in real time. I didn't need to refresh the page or anything. It's just pulling the results from that search. All right, now I can customize the design of this table even further, but what I want to move into is editing and deleting these records if I wanted. All right, so what I'm going to do is actually add another column to have some action items per client. So I'm going to add another column over to the right. Let's have 2 icons displaying side by side. I think there's a couple ways we can approach this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an edit icon. Okay, so we're going to have a little pencil icon here. I'm also going to have a trash can icon for the deletion. So we'll say trash, there we go, like this. Okay, let me change the styling of this so that they kind of match the rest of our colors here. And this new cell, let's center these items. Let's create a little bit more space between them, just a bit more so we don't accidentally click the wrong icon. And we're going to center these items here. I'm also going to take the width of the column overall and have it fit to content. I don't need it to be as wide, so I can actually control, right, the widths independently for all of those columns. Okay, so the deletion will be pretty easy. When this is clicked here, this is going to create a workflow, another data action to delete a record. All right, so this is going to delete the current row's client. That's it. It's going to be gone from the database. We can develop this further to, maybe offer a confirmation window first so that they don't accidentally delete. Lots of things that you can do there, but I'm just going to have it delete immediately as soon as I click on that icon. Now I'm going to do something different here with the edit icon. What I'm actually going to do is have the group up above populate the data from the cells or from the rows client here. This way, this form can actually serve a dual purpose, both for creating a new client and editing an existing one. Okay, so in order to accomplish that, this group needs to receive information. So the group is also going to act as a data source here in the case of editing. So I'm going to set the type of content to client. The data source here will be empty because the data source is actually going to be defined in the workflow. I could have a default here, but in this case, I need to change the data source anytime I click on the edit icon because that's going to mean sending a different client to that group. So when this icon is clicked, I'm going to define the data source with this action here. Display data for that group, that's the group create client. The data to display, right, or the data source that we're giving it is going to be the current rows client. Okay, now why am I doing this? Why am I providing a data source at that group level? Well, now each of these inputs can have an initial content. That's going to mean that it'll pre-populate with a value. And because the group now is pointing to a specific record, I'm going to reference the group create clients, client, right? This is the data source. And I'm going to go to the first name from there. You're going to find that there's actually many different pathways that you can create to access the data that you need. Data sources from inputs, from your plugins, from your database, and you can pass data around to different elements to create a highly interactive experience. So what I've done here in the input is I'm having it reference this outer group, the group create client, to find that client record that we sent from this icon here, and have it pre-populate with that record's first name. I'm going to copy this expression, okay, a little bit of a shortcut. Over here, come into the last name field, right click, paste, and switch this over to the last name's value. Okay, same thing for the email address. Okay, remember when the client is first being created, you're not going to see any values in here because we're going to make sure that they're empty to start. We'll look at resetting things in just a moment. So let's fill the rest of this in so we can see this in action here. Okay, and this is going to be the phone number. Okay, so let's see where we're at right now. I'm going to refresh the page. Okay, so I have my table of 3 clients. We don't have any values in the input because I haven't sent any data to the outer group. If I click on this icon here, now you see all of those details fill in. Okay, now there's a couple of things that I want to do. I want to change this button to say update or save, right? This button's also going to serve dual purpose. So let's do that now. I'm going to add a condition to the button. I don't have to create 2 buttons. I can just change the conditions around this button's appearance and also in the workflows. So when the parent group's client, this is referencing the data source of the outer group, when that client is not empty, right? When we're referencing something, as long as it's not empty, we know that we're in an edit mode. So I'm going to change the label to save changes. How about we do that? Make it very clear to the user, all right? And I think just for another visual cue, I think I want to change the color of the button. Let's change it to a green color. Okay, and I can preview what that's going to look like. That's very bright. I'm going to darken that green just a bit. Okay, so I can preview what that'll look like here when the condition kicks in. All right, so just that one conditional change to help the user visually see. All right, so I'm going to click Edit. Right now we can see the button changes. Now that doesn't mean that the workflow is going to do anything different. I do have to define that as well. So let's head over to this workflow here. I only want to create my client, right, when I click on this button, when the parent group's client is empty, right? Because that tells me that the inputs are all going to be empty and the user will have filled them in themselves. Versus, let's copy and paste this here. If the parent group's client is not empty, then I know I want to modify the existing client record. So rather than a create client action, I'm instead going to have a make a change to a client action, make a change to a thing. The thing we're changing is the parent group's client. Just like with the create action, I do need to define the fields that I have for this form. Again, we're not going to be working with the projects quite yet. So I'll map all of these fields as well. Input email address. We're going to do the first name here, as well as the last name, okay, and the phone number. And this is going to update the record. Okay, now I do, instead of the reset relevant inputs, what I'm going to swap this out for is a reset data group. Now that the group for the form is acting as a data source, I need to make sure that anytime I create or edit, I'm fully resetting it back to its default state so that I don't run into any conflicts with those initial contents, because I could go back and forth between creating and editing. I just need to make sure that it's always reliable to display those initial contents in the inputs. So I'm going to do a reset data on the entire group here. I'm going to copy this. I'm also going to do this for the creation flow as well. Okay, resetting the groups ensures that there's a lot more consistency when you're moving back and forth between a create versus edit situation. So let's go into this client Smith that we had here. Edit. Okay, let's say I change the name to Jane Doe. Okay, just the first and last name. We'll leave the email and the phone number. So I'll click on Save Changes. Right, you see how I've reverted back to the initial kind of point here where the form is clear. I have my blue button again, and we can see that the name has changed to Jane Doe. I can also confirm that further by going into my database view from the editor, right? The name has changed here. All right, let's do this one more time. Let's say Alex Hamilton turns into Alexander Hamilton, and we'll say Alex at test.com. And let's get rid of Alex's phone number. He doesn't have a phone number here. Okay, save changes. We can see those have been modified. Just a direct update. Now, if I wanted to delete, this client, for example, let's click on the delete icon and it's gone. My table has adapted a little bit. I can also control the height of this header so that it's not jumping around. I can fix it to a more stable height. Let's take a look at that real quick here. Let's go to the row 0 and let's have the height be a fixed height rather than a dynamic one. And we can change it to maybe 50 pixels. Right? That way it doesn't move around on us. But here we go. Here we have the ability to manage all of our clients with every single data changed, every single data manipulation that we can do in the workflows, creating, viewing, right, or reading, updating, and deleting. All right, so I've gone ahead and copied everything I did on the clients page and pasted it into the projects page because the management's going to be very similar. I have a form to create a new project, set up the name, deadline, select the client. I'll go over some of the differences here with these different elements, as well as the status, and I have a table to display these values. You can see that I've also added some borders around my table. I've compressed the heights of things a bit just to clean it up. So I'm going to show you just creating another project here, project B. Let's set the deadline to something in the past because I want to show you how to create a condition to change the coloring, right? To kind of help alert the user, hey, you're overdue for this particular project. We're going to choose another client here, George Washington, and let's set this one to active and create project. All right, so we have our second item in place, but this works exactly the same as the client management. I can edit and change, let's say archive, save changes. We can see that updates there. I'm going to change this back to active, right? And I can also delete. So going into the editor, just a couple of differences here. The first one is the deadline. I'm actually using a date time picker in order to choose the date. So this is a different element. It's not a regular input. Okay, it's its own thing. And when you select it, it'll pull open a calendar, which is really helpful. You can also modify different things about the coloring. You can choose the year in a drop-down if you enable that feature, things like that. The other difference is within our client and status fields here, we have drop-downs instead because I want the user to be able to select certain values. So here, this drop-down is going to be configured very much like the data source for the table, right? The drop-down is going to be working with a dynamic list of choices, in this case, a list of clients. We have to tell it where the clients live that we want to display here. So we're searching for clients. We can sort, we can add constraints if we want. And the caption for the dropdown is customizable as well, right? I could display the client email, an ID, something else, right? So I'm displaying the first name next to the last name. So it's more user-friendly for my user here. So I can see the current options first name, space, current options last name. I just built that out in the expression, right? Default value so that it pre-populates when we're editing is going to be the project's related client. Very similar here with this dropdown for the status because this is a predetermined list of choices. I want to pull from my option set of project statuses. So my type of choices, as you can see, OS project status. The source, Bubble has this kind of built in here. I can default it to all statuses. I can, of course, manipulate this further. I mean, you're going to see as I'm creating these expressions, there are a lot of options, a lot of operators, modifiers to really, reformat and manipulate and change and convert and calculate based off of your raw data values and option set values in your structure. You are not just limited to how things are saved directly in the database here. You can really manipulate things in real time in your design so that they, display exactly how you want it. All right, so now down below we have all the text just like I did with the clients. This deadline here, I want to point this one out because this is one where I did format the deadline to display specifically with a sort of abbreviated month, day, year with the slash in between. You have lots of formats you can choose from. You can also go fully custom and display your date and time however you need. Now, if I wanted to add a condition to the deadline so that it changes the color, let me know if we're past it. We're going to do something like this. We're going to say when the current date and time, this is a default data source that Bubble has available to us, when the current date and time is greater than the current row's project's deadline, okay, then I'm going to change the color of this text. Let's change it to this bright red, make it very noticeable for the user. Okay, we'll preview this in just a second. Over here with the client text, notice that I'm going to the related record, right? The row is a project. This is a table of projects. But in order to display some information about the client, I have to actually pass through the project to get to the related client's record to display client information. So I'm going to let me build this again from scratch, the current rows projects, related client, this is why I named them this way, related client. Now I have access to the client fields. So I can display the client's email address, their name, whatever I want to do from there. So that's precisely why I don't need to save client information again to the project record. As long as I have this relationship, that's really all I need to do. I don't have to create those redundancies and potentially create mistakes. All right, so let's refresh the page. And we're going to see one of our projects, we are past the deadline here. This one has not yet come up, so the formatting of that text is going to be, it's the default formatting. Now, I do want to show you, if I wanted to give the user the ability to filter this table by client, by deadline, by anything really, right? Be able to search through their own work, you can create that capability. It's just a matter of you setting up those inputs and modifying the data source. So just as a sneak peek for that sort of thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a constraint to my search for projects. Okay, this is just an example. I would probably want to build out a more formal area for filtering, but I'm actually going to have the project filter on the client dropdown that we see right here, just as an example. Okay, so I'm going to filter my search for projects. Related client has to equal whatever is in that dropdown, right? I'm creating a constraint. I only want projects where the related client equals whatever is in this value. So we're going to see dynamic behavior where the table changes based on what I select here. And actually, I'm also going to select this box here so that if there is no client selected, I still want to see everybody. I don't want it to show me nothing. So if this is empty, it's going to ignore the constraint. Therefore, it's going to show me all projects. So let's refresh the page, and I'm actually going to create a few more projects here so we can really see the effect of this. Project C, let's do another deadline in the past. Let's do Alexander, draft, create, and let's do project D here, deadline in the future, George, and archived, create. Okay, so you saw it moving around there a little bit. So if I only wanted to see projects for Alex Hamilton, you see how it filters that? It's changing the data source of the table in real time. Switch it over to George, now I only see those records. Remove that selection, now I see everyone. Okay, again, I would probably not want the dropdown within the form affecting the filtered table. I'd probably want to have a separate set of filters for this and design it a little bit better for the user to do that. But that's just an example of how you can make these table designs much more interactive. So we're going to get rid of that for now. Now, before we move into setting up our timesheet functionality, where we're going to have more calculations and things, I'm going to show you how privacy rules affect these table designs, or really any time you need to search through data and display things back to the user. At the moment, I've removed all of my privacy rules. Everything is pretty much open. So I'm going to add a rule here. Again, the owner rule that we created earlier. All right, and this is going to say only when the project's creator is the current user will we be able to see everything. Okay, so if I refresh the page, I should be able to see all 4 records because I've been logged in as a user and I'm able to see all 4 records. I'm currently logged in as, let's double check here. I think this is the only user, my Jane user. Okay, so let's quickly set up a new user that has their own projects. I'm going to log out of Jane. Let's sign up as a new user. Let's do Edward at test.com. Test, and test is going to be their password. Sign up. All right, and I don't have a navigation function in here, so I'm just going to manually head over to the projects page. Right, so now you can see how my table is empty. I'm not looking at Jane's projects. I'm going to create a new project for myself. We'll call this website design, something like that. This is going to be end of November, and this is going to be, now notice, these are Jane's clients. I should not be seeing these people, and it's because I don't have a privacy rule on this. If I go back to the privacy rule for clients and do the same thing, okay, we'll say owner again here, and this is going to be the same expression. This client's creator is the current user, then they have access, and I'm going to remove access for anybody else who falls outside of those rules, okay? Now I'll refresh the page. I'll have to fill this in again, but notice now I do not see Jane's clients. In fact, I should probably go into my clients table, create a new client for myself. Okay, so we'll create Ross Geller, Ross at friends.co, and Ross will have a phone number. Okay, this is Edward's only client. All right, so if I go back over to my projects and set this up again, website design, and a deadline here. Now this is my client that I can see. I'm not mixing data with other users, and we'll set this as a draft project, right? This is the only project that I have access to. Okay, I'm just going to jump into my editor in the app data so you can see now I have 2 users. Now as an admin of your application, you can actually kind of bypass the entire login flow, going through it in the front end, and run as any one of your users without having to type in their passwords. That's actually helpful, for testing, but be very mindful. Anybody you give access to your editor will be able to run this operation if they have admin access. So if you're inviting collaborators, just be mindful of that in terms of security, okay? So I'm going to rerun my application now as Jane. So it's going to log me out of Edward, log me back in as Jane. So here I see Jane's projects again. I only see Jane's clients, right? I don't see Ross in there. That is Edward's client. That person is gone. Same thing if I go back to the client table. These are only Jane's clients, right? So that's where those privacy rules can really make a huge difference. And I set up the rule in one location in the editor here. I actually didn't need to modify the constraints within the searches. Now you can, and in a lot of cases you should. In a lot of cases you probably still need additional constraints. Sometimes the privacy rules aren't going to be enough. Sometimes you have more specific logic that needs to go into these searches to display the right information, okay? So you don't want to rely on just one. A lot of times it's a combination of things. All right, so now what I've done is I've brought some of those elements over to the timesheet section. We're going to do a few different things here. I don't have the same edit kind of group up at the top. Of course, you can do that. I do want to point out that the approach that I've taken for managing the editing of a record, this is just one way to do it. You can set up inputs inside of your table to edit things in line. You could take the user to a totally different page if you have many more things to edit, or show a pop-up to display things that way. You can hide the table, show the form after that. Many different approaches that you can take for this. So for the timesheet, I'm going to be more focused on doing calculations. So what the user will do is they'll select a project. So let's say project C. Start their time entry. It will create a new time entry record, just like we did before with the other items. And now we have this in the table. So I created a new time entry a little bit earlier here. So we have project A, and we only have the start time. I don't have an end time yet because it's still active. I'm currently working on that particular task. And I also don't have a calculated duration because I don't have an end, and therefore I don't have a calculated cost. So I'm going to fill in some of these areas here so that we can then stop the time entry and then do these calculations and save them to the record. From there, the user can then add these entries to an invoice, for example, to send it over to the client. So jumping into the editor here, first thing I want to touch on is this end area. Right now, this is empty, but I want to give the user a way to stop the time entry, right? Put in the end time. So I'm going to take this text and I'm actually going to hide it by default and collapse it when hidden, because if we're not going to see a text yet, we should see a button for the user to click. So the condition for this will be only when the current row's time entry end time is not empty, right? If there is a value there, then we do want to see this text. So if it's not empty, then we're going to make it visible, right? So we're conditionally changing that property. By default, it is not visible, but under this circumstance, it will become visible. Okay, so I'm going to copy this button so that we have a button in here. And let me also hide this text for now. We're going to turn that off there. Okay, so this button, and let's make this centered here. And we're also going to change this to the outline, just to make it a bit more subtle. This is going to be our end entry button. Okay, and this is going to have the opposite condition. It'll still be hidden by default, and we'll also collapse it when hidden so it doesn't take up any extra space. But the condition is going to be when the current row's time entry end time is empty, then we're going to make this visible, because that's the scenario in which we want to click the button to give it a value. Okay, you see how with these conditions, with the labels, and In the text elements, I'm creating expressions to give Bubble instructions for what I want to see. All these dynamic values are coming from different sources. And you're going to find that the list of sources are also quite context sensitive. It depends on the type of element you're in, what container you're inside of, what other elements are available around you, right? Whether inputs and things like that. So these options will definitely change based on what the scenario is around the element in question here. All right, so let's take a look at the preview here just to see where we're at with this dynamic change. Okay, so both of these are active projects. So I want to create a workflow to end the entry. Let's start a workflow from clicking the button. So this is going to modify the time entry. Remember, I already created it. I created it when I clicked on the start time entry up at the top. So I'm not going to create a new record. I'm just going to modify the existing one, make a change to the current row's time entry. And we're going to do several things here. The first is to record the time. So the end time is the current date and time. Okay, now that I have the end time in here, I can calculate the duration. So I'm going to actually do this as actually, I think it'll be better if I do this in the same action here. The duration in minutes is going to be the current date and time minus this entry. So, whoops, the current rows, not the index, the current rows time entries start time. And because Bubble can tell that this is a difference in two date and time values, it gives me the option to format that difference in different units. So I want to do this in terms of minutes. Okay, so current date and time minus the start time in terms of minutes. Okay, now what I'm going to do is in a second action, I'm going to calculate the cost. And I'm doing this as a second action so that I can kind of work off of the result of the previous one. This is also going to speak to workflow strategy a bit here. The timing of your actions can make a big difference in whether you get accurate results or not, right? If you have dependencies. Also, this can affect the performance of your workload consumption, right? If you have multiple actions asking Bubble to make multiple changes to the record over and over and over again, you're going to be using more workload units. So if you can consolidate things like I did with these two here, that's going to help you use less units. In theory, I could actually calculate the cost in a single action, but I do just want to show you that, you can have these dependent actions on one another, okay? But there's a lot of strategy that goes into creating really efficient, but always, accurate and reliable workflows by controlling how you split things up, the timing of your steps and everything. And there's lots of different tools to help you with that as well. So for step 2 here, I'm also going to make a change to the same record, and we're going to say result of step 1, because that will tell Bubble to wait for step 1 to happen first. As I add these actions here, we're going to see step 1, step 2, but technically they're not always going to run in that order, right? Step 2 is not always going to wait for step 1 until I explicitly say so here. Bubble is going to try to help you move through your workflows or execute your workflows as quickly as possible. In some cases, that means some actions may run simultaneously. So if we need to force an order, we're going to take advantage of these expressions that help us do that. So I want the result of step 1 to be the thing I change. And in this case, we're updating the calculated cost. Now, if you recall, when we were setting up the data structure, I have that rate saved to the user. So I'm going to take the current user's rate and I'm going to multiply it by the calculated minutes that we have. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to convert the minutes to hours because we're going to assume that the rate is an hourly rate. So I'm going to take the result of step 1. Result of step 1's, where is it? The calculated duration in minutes. And I'm going to divide this by 60. Okay, so that's going to give me the value in hours. And then I'm going to multiply that value by the current user's, let's see here, the rate, just like that. Okay, so a little bit of a calculation there to get that cost in place. All right, so once that cost is there, then we'll be able to see, actually for both duration and cost, we'll be able to see values here for these texts. Now, you probably noticed that we're seeing an empty value, but the word min, or the abbreviation min there, and that's because I do have the expression, but if there's no value, then it's just going to be empty, but I do have that static text here. So this is another situation where we could add a condition. We could say, hide this by default, and in the condition, we'll say when the current row's time entry duration is not empty, then we can make it visible, just to make it a little cleaner there. All right, so I'm going to refresh the page and let's go ahead and end the entry for this project A, which has been running for a little while. So end entry, there we go, 16 minutes, and notice that the cost is 0. That is probably because I don't have a rate saved to my user. So let's correct that real quick here. go to the user. I believe I'm running as Jane. Let's give Jane a rate of $75 an hour. Okay, so we'll hit save, and I'm just going to reset myself here a bit. We're going to delete the, let's delete the values from that time entry that I just updated. Okay, so we're going to remove the calculated duration. We're going to remove the cost as well as the end time. Okay, so just to reset myself here, now that I've made that correction, given Jane a rate. So again, end entry, there we go. So now we have an end time. It's calculated a difference of 17 minutes, which gives me a cost of $21.25. Okay, let's do the same thing here for project C. Okay, 8 minutes that's been running. We have $10 even for that one. The currency sort of display here is another type of formatting that you can add to numbers. Okay, so if you do a formatted as operation, I'll show you from scratch here. Right, once we have our number and I click on more, I have the option to, well, I can do a lot of math here, but I can also reformat that number in terms of currency, and Bubble will allow me to define the decimal places. I can do the thousand separator, you know, depending on the country you're in, you might want to customize this, all sorts of currency symbols here, and so that's how I was able to display it that way. Okay, now what if I wanted to display the total amount of time that I've spent across all projects, or again, if I wanted to filter on projects, I could add one of those filters that I showed you earlier. But just to show you how to aggregate on things, let's add a group below our table. Let's pull from this group element here, and I'm going to copy and paste this. Let's have it below. I believe this needs to be inside of our main group. It's probably sitting outside of it. Let me collapse all of this down here. All right, this group here, let's go into the main group and let's position this to the end. Okay, so this group is going to be a summary group, just like that. All right, and I'm going to pull out these texts here. Let's remove these items. Okay, I just wanted the group for the sizing and everything. So this text is going to display the sum of the duration, right? So I'm going to take the tables timesheet, right? This is the full list of time entries from the table element, okay? And I'm going to reference the duration, which is giving me a list of durations, right? I have a list of time entries, therefore I have a list of durations, each one in the row there. So because I have a list of numbers, I can perform a sum. So this is the total number of minutes. Now I do want to see this in terms of hours because it's likely going to be over an hour when I add them all up together. So again, I'm going to divide this by 60. And let's round this to maybe 1 decimal place. So rounding it to 1, just like that. And let's see here. That will give me the duration in terms of hours. Let's give this a placeholder for duration sum. Now, I do want this text to be moved over to the right here so it's aligned with the table a bit more. So at the group level, I'm going to have this right aligned. And I'm also going to add another text. Whoops, didn't mean to pull that out. I'm going to have another text here for the cost. So I'm just going to copy and paste so that we have a duplicate over here. Okay, and this is going to be the very similar expression. So the list of time entries, each item's cost, and then do a sum. Now I don't have to do any more math on that, but I do want to format it so that it's displayed as a currency. So same thing, currency, 2 decimal places, going to do the comma for the thousands, separator, and my dollar symbol here. Okay. I can, of course, adjust the spacing a bit more so that it's more aligned with the table, but for now I'm going to leave it there as is. So we'll do the cost sum here. Okay, so if I refresh the page, I should have a total. We should have about 30 something. Yeah, there we go. Looks like we have something off here with our duration amount though. So, oh, this is because it's in terms of hours, of course. We haven't reached an hour. If you know what we can do is we can add a condition on this text so that if it's less than an hour to instead show it as minutes. So in the condition, I can say when the table, let's go to the same expression, table timesheets, list of entries, duration, sum. If that sum is less than 60 minutes, then we're going to instead just show the minute sum and rather than converting it into hours. So again, table timesheets, list of time entries, duration, sum, like this, and we're going to put in the abbreviation here, minute, and I'm also going to add the abbreviation over here to hours, like that. Okay, so again, you can see how we're manipulating these raw values so that it makes sense for the user. There's our total time in minutes and our total cost. And again, there is a lot you can add to this design to essentially create a reporting system where you're filtering on maybe a date range, filtering on clients, to do sums based on a specific selected client, right? What's the total cost for one client, or what's the total cost for the last month or the last quarter? It's just a matter of adding the inputs you need and then manipulating the table from there so that these values update in real time. Now let's say that you wanted to visualize this information. I'm going to start a new time entry there for now. Let's say you wanted to visualize this information in a chart or graph. So you're going to look at plugins for that. So I'm going to add Bubble's own charting plugin. So we're going to search chart here. There it is. There are many different plugins for this. There's a lot of fancy ones that are highly interactive, some paid ones, some free ones. So it's just a matter of sort of exploring the type of chart that you're interested in. We're going to go with this basic one. This one by Bubble will be enough to kind of demonstrate some visualizations here. So I'm going to add an instance of a chart element to this group. All right, and let's make this maybe 100 pixels tall. Let's have it expand the rest of the width there. All right, okay, and let's have this be, let's see, what do we want to use for this one? Let's do a bar chart for this. And let's say we want to aggregate the data based on time. So you can see the kind of placeholder here is by month. Now, I'm going to manually manipulate some time entries in the database so that we can actually see an example of how things would look over a bigger span of time rather than within the last several minutes here that I've been demonstrating this. So to set this up, we're going to do type of data is time entry, and I'm going to reference the timesheet table that we have down below. Okay, and I'm going to kind of side note here. Let's do timesheets, time entry. Side note here is the only time I've performed a search in this entire demonstration for this page here is within this table, search for time entries. And a search is, a heavier activity compared to many others. It does use more workload units compared to others. So you do want to be very efficient when you do searches. I have other areas in this design where I'm referencing a list of time entries, but I'm not having to do a search all over again. The first here is in the duration for the sum, right? The duration sum. I'm not doing a search. I could get the exact same result, but I don't need to because I've already got a reference on my page that has already found those time entries. So I'm just going to that element, right? So I'm piggybacking off of that. Same thing here for the cost. Okay, so you want to be mindful of any areas that you can, take advantage of to reference instead of do over. And end up using an excess number of workload units. All right, so back to our chart here. Again, I'm referencing the table, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to group the entries. I'm going to group by the, let's say the start time. Yes, the start time. Okay, and so this is going to allow me to create these different buckets of data where all of the timesheets are now organized by their start time. And I'm going to group them at the month level. Okay, so if there is a month that contains 5 entries, that is a bucket of 5 items. And this grouping function has some built-in aggregation details, and this is perfect for a chart. Okay, so I want to group every month, right? So it's a monthly grouping. I'm not going to skip a month or do every quarter or anything like that. Now for the starting date, I'm just going to grab the earliest time entry we have in our list. So again, reference the table, go to the list, and I'm going to go to the, where is it here, the start time, and we're going to grab the min. This is going to give me the earliest start time from that list of times for each of the entries. All right, and I'm also going to, I don't want to skip any groups, so if there were no time entries for, let's say, February, I still want to see the month there, even if there's not going to be a bar. And then the ending date is just going to be the current date and time. Okay, so this is going to set up my grouping. Now for the aggregation, I'm going to sum, let's see, we could do the total time, right, for that month, okay, calculated duration. I can also have multiple aggregations if I wanted. Okay, so now the value for this chart is going to be the summed time for each bucket, in this case, each month. The label expression is going to be the month itself, so I'm going to grab this from the start time, reformat this so that we're only displaying the month and the year. I'm going to go to custom. We're going to replace this here with a month and year formatting. This way it gets rid of the precise date and time because, again, I'm grouping this by month. I only care about the month and the year here. Now, before I preview this, I am going to add in a few more time entries so that it spans several different months so we can actually get a better representation of this chart. All right, so I've added in a few more examples here, just some easy calculations, but spanning some different points in time. I've also increased the height of the chart just a little bit to give us a bit more room, and I've abbreviated the month just a touch. I had previewed it here, and these adjustments are going to make it look a little bit better. So here's our chart. We've got some more data here in June, totaling a duration of 120 minutes. Here we have 60 minutes, and then here's November. If I go to end entry, you can see that jumped up just a little bit. So there was that slight change. Okay, and now that I'm noticing this button kind of being off-centered, I think what I want to do is actually move it inside of this group here with the project drop-down. So we're going to put that there and place it at the end. Let's also remove this fit width to content. I think that's going to be a cleaner design here. There we go. I think that's a bit better. Okay, so, just based off of the table, we're able to do a lot of things in real time on the page, calculating these sums and actually visualizing some data in these charts here. Now, this was a very basic chart element. You can still customize a few things further with the colors and the formatting, but again, if you explore the plugin marketplace a bit more, you'll find that there are a vast amount of premium plugin and chart options that you can work with. All right, so now we're going to move into the invoices side of things to really close the loop for the user, right? They've come in to manage their clients, their projects, they've been entering in their timesheets, and now it's time to set up an invoice so that they can send it to the client and get paid. Now, we're not actually going to go through the point of integrating with the payment gateway and generating invoices and checkout pages and things like that, right? Payment links. All of that is absolutely possible, with an integration with some sort of a payment gateway. We love recommending Stripe for taking payments, for creating invoices. There are many different plugins that you can check out to work with that. You can always use the API connector as well if you wanted to create a custom integration, but there's a lot you can do there to generate really easy ways to accept payments. Okay, what I want to go through really here is the data management side of things so that all of your internal records are updated according to your custom features. So what I've got here on the invoices is the user will first choose a client that they want to invoice. So let's say Alexander Hamilton. We're going to choose one of Alex's projects here. So these are two projects tied to this client. We've got some filters on the drop down. I'll choose project A. And I'm going to create an invoice, and what's going to happen is it's going to create an invoice that is associated with any time entries for project A that have not yet been invoiced. Okay, so I'm going to click on this now. Right, so there's the invoice, and we can see that there were two time entries. It calculated the total amount for that entry. We have a number here. It's by default in draft. We haven't sent it to the client. We have a reference here so we know who the client is. And I have a way to review the time entry. So let's say I don't actually want to include one of these entries in the invoice. Let's say I delete this June entry. At the moment, it's totaling to $96.25, so I'm going to hit the X icon, and you'll see that it actually recalculated it. Now it's just the amount for this one time entry. I can do the same thing for the invoice that's up above here. It's totaling to $161.25 for the 3. Let's say I remove the November entry. Okay, so it brings it down. So we've got some workflows there to do these recalculations. So now let's say I'm ready to send Alex here the invoice. I'm going to click on this button. We can see the status changed. I also have a change to the button. I can't click on it again. It's actually disabled. And with an integration with the payment gateway, you'd want to have some sort of API connection or a webhook, an app-to-app notification so that you get immediately notified to automatically update the status behind the scenes, right, when that payment comes through. So that would be the idea there. I can also choose to delete the invoices if I want. Obviously, we have some visualizations here. I believe I have this set up to the creation date of the record, which was all today, so it's going to be in 1 month right now. But you can have this visualize, the amount of paid invoices, right? How much you've earned throughout the month. You can also break this down on a daily basis, weekly, however you want to visualize that there. So let's take a look at the logic behind the scenes to get us to this point here, and also the design. You'll notice that we have this sort of inner list within the outer row here of the table. Okay, so jumping over to the design, I have obviously I have that same bar chart element with a reference to the invoices from my table, and I'm also grouping by specific date. So this is very similar to the previous example. Now here I have my drop down of clients, so it's going to dynamically show me list of clients, sorted, first and last name there. And here I have only the projects that are tied to the client. So notice I'm actually not doing a search. I'm referencing the other drop down. I'm going to the drop down clients values related project, right? Whichever client I selected, I'm going to that client records related projects. We didn't go over this earlier, so let's jump over to the clients page here real quick. Whenever the projects page, whenever a project is created, not only should we be saving the client to the project, but we're also going to do that relationship on the other end. If you think back to the beginning when we set up the data structure, right? Remember, the project has a one-to-one relationship, but the client has a one-to-many relationship with one or more projects. Okay, so project is created. We assign the selected client to that project. There's the one-to-one. What we would also want to do here is make a change to that selected client. So we can find this two ways. I can say the result of step one's client. I can also just go directly to the drop down. I get the exact same result there. Okay, so you have multiple pathways. Here I want to add the new project to the client's list of projects, right? This is the list field here. So I have different operators for that. I want to add a single project to the client's existing list of projects. We're going to add the result of step one, our brand new project. Now we have this shortcut to identify projects that belong to a specific client rather than having to ask Bubble to do a whole search and filtering that search query. This is a more efficient pathway to get that, that segmented list, that list of projects. So going back over to our invoices, I've already pre-created some invoices manually. That's why we're able to see items here. In that drop down, this is the exact field that we're referencing that I just walked through, right? It's the drop down clients values related projects. That way it changes, for Alex it's A and C, for George here it's going to be B and D. It's dynamically updating based on the selection of the first drop down. All right, so clicking on this button here, we're going to create our new invoice. We're going to save the new client that was selected, and we're also going to locate all of the time entries that are appropriate for this invoice and save it to the invoices list of time entries. So this is again another list field, and we're using a list operator here to save a list, not just one item, but multiple items. So I'm going to use this set list operator. I'm going to search for time entries where the project is the selected project from the dropdown, and specifically time entries that do not have a related invoice yet. Right? This tells me that this is an uninvoiced entry. I'm only looking for time entries for this project that have not yet been invoiced. Okay, the time entry, I've added a relationship here when I notice that this is going to be helpful to have to locate the right entries, a relationship to the invoice that they will eventually end up on. When they start out, we're not going to have an invoice value here. But now I can make a change to a list of all of those time entries. Okay, now that we're creating the invoice, this is going to be the result of step one's time entries. And and then we're going to update the field for related invoice to save the brand new invoice from step one. Okay, so the fact that the entries have this value here is going to help us know which time entries have already been invoiced and which ones have yet to be invoiced. This way we don't, double invoice the same entry. Now the next thing I'm doing here is I'm going to be calculating certain values for the invoice. If we go back to the data structure, we have a total cost and a total duration. So the total cost is the sum of each time entry's cost, right? This is sort of the subtotal, each item there, and this is our grand total for the invoice. Same thing for the duration. I'm summing all the time durations for each of these individual entries. And what I'm doing in the workflow is I'm actually triggering what's called a custom event over here. Let me change the color so that you can actually see and color code these events to identify them a little bit more easily. This is a workflow that I'm going to funnel into from multiple trigger points. There's actually multiple places in my design here where I want to recalculate the invoice's cost and duration. And so rather than setting up the exact same workflow action with the same calculation in multiple places, I'm going to have all of those trigger points feed into one singular event. This is going to save me time. It's going to make sure that my calculations are consistent no matter what the trigger point was, and reduces any potential for error. So from the creation of the invoice, once I create it, I've identified the entries. I need to calculate those totals. So I'm triggering the custom event. This is an action you can find here under custom events, trigger, and the custom event itself was created by just standalone here under custom. I can set up a new event. So custom events are always triggered by other workflows, right? So I gave it this custom name, and I created a parameter for this event so that it could receive information. Okay, this is like creating sort of a field for the custom event specifically. This is not a field in the database. A parameter is a way for me to pass information to the event. So from this workflow, when I go to trigger it, I'm sending my new invoice to that event so that it actually knows which invoice to calculate on. So once this triggers, we're going to make a change to that invoice, right? This is the value of our parameter here. And now I can retrieve details from that invoice to calculate the totals. This invoices, time entries, costs, right? The list of costs and summing them up. Same thing for this invoices, related time entries, durations from those entries and summing those up. Okay, the other place where we would trigger this calculation is right here on the X icon. If I remove an entry, I need to recalculate those values. So on the trash icon here, sorry, not the trash, the close icon, that X, we're going to do several things to sort of remove that entry, make sure that everything is synced across all related records. We're first going to update the time entry itself and clear out that reference to the invoice. If we're removing it, we want to leave that empty again so that it can later be added to another invoice. And we're going to update the invoice so that the time entry is removed from its list. Just because we have these two-way relationships in the structure does not tell Bubble to assume anything, that they are always going to be synced. We specifically have to go to both sides and make these adjustments. Just like when we create them, I specifically have to define on both sides, this invoice is tied to this, these entries, and all of these entries are tied to this invoice. Bubble will not assume that for me and do any of that saving automatically for me, right? Those links. Okay, so back to our close icon. We've now undone those relationships when we get rid of the time entry. Note that we're not deleting the time entry, we're just clearing those values to sort of remove those connections. And then from here, I'm also going to trigger that recalculation, because now that we've removed the entry, that means there was less time involved, so the cost needs to be lowered. So both the creation and the removal of an individual entry filter into, or not filter into, but funnel into this custom event to do that recalculation. This way I only need to manage this piece of the logic once. So this is kind of like, the equivalent of a reusable element with our design. This is kind of like a reusable workflow event that you can trigger from multiple places. Our trash can icon is just doing a simple deletion as well, just like we have with all of our other sections. Now, I do want to call out here within the time entries, the design's a little bit different from what we've seen with the other sections. What I've created inside of this particular cell is a repeating group. Now, we haven't seen repeating groups in our examples up to this point. We've been using tables for all of our dynamic list displays. A repeating group can also work with dynamic lists, but it doesn't have to be structured as a formal table here. It's a little bit more flexible. So repeating group is also going to take a type of content and a data source just like a table, and it will generate as many rows as it needs to populate from this list here. So for this particular invoice, this first row, there are 2 items. So the repeating group is generating 2 rows. Then finally, I also have this button that's got a condition on it to let me know that an invoice has been sent. So when the current row's invoice status is my sent status, right? This is my option set here. Then we're going to change the label to say invoice sent. I'm going to change the coloring a little bit, and I'm going to make it not clickable. This prevents me from actually triggering the workflow again. The workflow itself is going to do the following. It's going to make a change to the invoice. It's going to save the sent timestamp, and it's going to update the status. Obviously, I would have other things too. I would likely be sending an email. I would be triggering my payment integration to actually generate an invoice with a payment link. There would likely be many other things that are happening here. But internally, for the invoice record, these are the updates that I want to trigger as well. Okay, so all throughout development, and even after you started releasing versions to your users, you need to be mindful of your app's workload. Every app is different, and so every app is going to consume workload differently. Workload is Bubble's Bubble's measure of your app's activity. And this is ultimately going to dictate the cost of your app as well as how performant it is for your users. And the main area that's going to help you understand your application's workload consumption is the metrics tab. Let's take a look. This app metrics section is essentially a report of your app's workload consumption. So remember that, most of the activity that you're running in your app, making changes to the database, loading pages, uploading files, it's all going to cost you a certain number of workload units. And not all activity is made equal. Some may be just a fraction of a unit, or let's say you have a workflow with a lot of actions, so there's going to be a combination of activities, and those units will stack up. And basically Bubble is going to tally all of that up for you. And here we're seeing a visualization of that so that you understand your exact usage over different periods of time. And the most important period of time you want to pay attention to is the month, because you are allocated a certain number of units you can use on a monthly basis. At the end of the month, that number resets for you, okay? And this is where the app plans come in. Every plan is going to give you a certain number of units that you're allowed to use. The higher the plan, the more units, right? So you just want to make sure that your usage isn't going anywhere near that limit. Otherwise, you risk going into overages where you're paying more, or potentially your app being taken offline, okay? Now this area here will also help you drill down to the week level, to the day, even down to the hour, because in some cases you may need to find where your inefficiencies are if they're not already obvious to you. Understanding where the higher areas of consumption are going to be the best opportunities for optimizing things. Now this isn't to say that the more workload units you consume, the worse your app is going to perform. That's not the case at all. It's not a one-to-one correlation like that. Some applications are simply more complex. Some applications simply have thousands and thousands of users or high frequency in activities. Okay, so more units is not necessarily a bad thing. The key is that you want to be efficient with that consumption. You want to make sure that you're not using more units than you really need. If you can perform the same activities, right, and get the same outcomes in less units, then you're building a lot smarter. You're building more efficiently, and that's what we're trying to get after. So use these charts to help you understand where the heavier parts of your app are, because those are likely going to be the areas where you can make bigger impacts in creating more efficiencies, okay? So the chart down below, this pie chart here, is actually going to help you drill down into the exact expressions and elements, in your actual designs and your workflows, following these different categories, right? So this particular app within the live version, it's using about 40,000 workload units. This next app I have over here, about 20,000 workload units for the live version. I can see that there was a day where there was maybe some unusual extra activity going on, but this is the kind of thing that's going to help you understand what usage is looking like in your app, especially if your app users are less predictable, right? If it's not necessarily an internal tool where you have employees clocking in, clocking out, basically doing the same thing every day. This will ensure that you're always on top of any unexpected spikes, making sure that you have given your application the breathing room it needs for the units, right? And then down below, we have a chart that's going to help you break down that actual activity into the expressions, the actual logic that you've created, so that you truly understand what exactly is contributing to that activity. I'm actually going to switch back over to our timesheet application. Let me come back in here into the logs. Let me reset this here real quick. Okay, so this was a brand new application, so we don't have a lot of activity here, just 157 units being used. And down below, I can see that I have three categories that I've been using: fetching data, running workflows, and loading pages. So the biggest slice of the pie here was fetching data, right? We had all those tables doing searches for our records. So within fetching data, I have these subcategories, different ways of searching. Okay, this is the biggest slice of the pie here, just our normal search. And I have several different search expressions throughout my application. So these are the different slices that we're going to see there. Let me click on this first one for time entries. That's the one that I happen to load up the most throughout these demos. And so you see how it took me exactly to this element and actually highlighted the expression. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to click on this slice of the pie here. It'll take me to the page and actually highlight it. Even if I was on a different page, Bubble would change it over for me. So this can really help me understand, all right, if I'm seeing massive usage within a particular category or particular expression, I know exactly where to go to then investigate, see if I can, make it more efficient in some way. Maybe I can reference a different data source where the search has already been done. Maybe I can add constraints to reduce the number of records being returned. There could be many reasons for why a single expression action could be taking up more room on the chart here. So obviously, it's going to depend on your application or what you're doing, but you have all the information you need here to learn and understand what your app is doing, and point out potentially any areas of inefficiencies. Now, jumping over to a different application, this is just to illustrate, every app is different, so you're going to see different pictures with these charts. This application has incredible consistency in its usage. This app happens to be quite connected to APIs. In fact, most of its data is driven by external sources. And so that's going to be the primary category here, compared to many other apps where typically search is going to be the primary category. But I can also see that this application's primary usage is within its development environment. So they haven't really gone live with real users in full production quite yet. They're still very much testing everything out. So we can see kind of that breakup between development and live. Here's another application with a different picture here. This is kind of telling me that, the application's typically used during the week rather than on the weekends, right? We have no activity over these 2, sometimes 3-day time spans. This is also an application that uses more units just in general, right? Within these 4 to 5 day weekday spans, right? The live usage is 84,000, right? This is still a 30-day time frame. So again, I want to reiterate that more units is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes applications happen to be more complex. They may have more users, more frequency and activity, right? More connections to third-party systems. More units is not a bad thing, but you just want to make sure that you're efficient with the units that you are using. No matter what type of app you're building, managing workload comes down to 3 things: complexity, volume, and repetition. You want to find the right balance between these 3 because that's going to lead to a more optimized app for your users, as well as a more cost-effective one for you. So complexity speaks to how involved an activity is. Let's say that you have a complicated search with a lot of filters, maybe some conditions on it, maybe it's doing some data manipulations within the search. Okay, so that's much more complex than, let's say, loading a blank page. Right? You don't need a lot of a complex activity to consume a high number of workload units. Okay, so you want to make sure that if you're seeing things that are more complex in nature, if you can simplify them, if you can break them down, maybe restructure your database so that you have easier pathways to information. These are all ways that can help you reduce complexity and therefore reduce workload unit consumption. Volume speaks to the amount of data that you're asking Bubble to return from the server and send it over to the browser. The more data that's getting sent to the browser, the more workload units you're consuming. So you may want to make sure that you're only asking for what you're going to use and no more than that, right? You don't want to go into excess. And repetition speaks to the frequency of your activity. If you're just constantly running workflows in the background, for example, that are updating records in the database or performing searches, it's really easy to rack up those workload units. So be very mindful about when you are triggering your activity, because the timing can make a huge difference in your workload consumption. Now, if managing workload sounds a little overwhelming, a bit intimidating, I understand, but don't worry, because when you're creating your app for the first time, you're not going to have a lot going on. There's not going to be very much to manage at first, right? You're not going to have thousands of records right out of the gate, or overly complex logic immediately in your workflows, or hundreds of visual elements in your design. Now, I will say that your app could get to that point, but it's going to be an evolution. It'll be a process. You're going to start with very simple design, simple logic. And you want to make it a habit to check in on your workload consumption by reviewing your metrics tab. Learn from it. Understand what's working and what's not, what's efficient and what's not, and make corrections as you go. The more your app evolves, the more you're going to get comfortable with finding patterns and identifying, efficiencies and even anticipating those things so that, you don't become inefficient. So this is very much an evolution, but you have to be mindful of this from the very beginning so that you don't run into, reworking things later on or running into bigger headaches later on. With that said, there are many areas of the Bubble editor that are really meant to help you stay efficient. So if you can take advantage of these wherever you can, do so, because they're going to put you in a much stronger position from the start. Starting with the data structure, you want to take advantage of option sets as much as possible. These are not technically a part of the database, so they're more lightweight for Bubble to reference, which can lead to better performance. You also want to take advantage of relationship fields between your data types. That leads to more dynamic logic, definitely more scalable logic. You can reduce redundancies this way, maybe even reduce errors in your work as well. So connecting data types together through relationship fields is a good way to go. Now, in your designs, take the time to set up styles. You know, the styles are essentially a centralized location for visual properties and settings and configurations, and it's much easier for Bubble to reference one single location where all of those are organized compared to referencing every single independent element in your pages. It's just a lot more work for it. Also with designs, take advantage of reusable elements. This is the kind of thing that's going to help save you from mistakes. It's going to help you stay consistent and definitely save you a lot of time, building the same thing over and over. Use a reusable element for common things that will show up on multiple pages, such as your menus, your navigation systems, your headers, footers, things like that. Custom states are another fantastic capability that you can take advantage of. This is how you can store temporary values. They're not actually being saved to your database unless you want it to, unless you say so in a workflow. But they're very commonly used to reduce the number of searches you're performing on a page, right? Because you can consolidate the results and kind of store them, hold them in a custom state rather than asking Bubble to perform the same search over and over, right? This goes back to the repetition thing, which could lead to more workload unit consumption. Now for workflows, custom events and conditions can help you control the timing of your activities. And bad timing can easily lead to an overconsumption of workload units. So by leveraging conditions, for example, you can prevent activity from running if it's just not necessary. Now, you've probably heard me mention a few times throughout this video that your workload consumption can also affect the cost of your application. So let's take a look at Bubble's subscription planner to understand this a little bit better. This is Bubble's subscription planner. This is a calculator that's going to help you understand your app's monthly cost according to the plan you want to place it on and the estimated number of workload units you need in a month. Okay, so the first thing you'll want to do is choose your billing cycle, whichever you prefer. Just keep in mind that the annual option does give you a little bit of a discount compared to monthly. I am going to go ahead and select monthly here for this demo though. Then you'll want to choose the plan that you want your app to be on. Now, I will say that most new applications will be just fine on the starter plan, but keep in mind that these plans are not just about the number of workload units you get, right? You can see that each plan comes with a certain amount, and the higher tier you are, the more units you get. But that's not all that you need to think about. If you go over to the pricing page for Bubble, you can review all of the different features and access to different capabilities. In some cases, some features will just, some limits will be lifted. In other cases, certain features are locked off until you're at a higher tier. Okay, so you want to make sure that you actually choose the plan that your app actually needs, regardless of the workload units, right? You may need the growth at minimum because of features that only start at growth, even if you don't need this many workload units, all right? So we're going to start with we're going to go through some different scenarios here. I'm going to start with the monthly starter. That's what I want my app to be on, is the lowest paid plan. And I'm going to estimate 100,000 workload units. Okay, so I'm going to calculate this. Now, Bubble is recommending that I just use a starter plan and nothing else to cover my workload needs. Right? I've asked for 100,000, or I'm estimating 100,000. That is more than enough being covered by the plan itself. So there's nothing extra here. All right, so that's a very consistent, predictable bill that I would have there, as long as my monthly usage stays at this amount here. Now let's say that I'm estimating 200,000 workload units. Okay, so this is actually between these two plans. I can see that it's 25,000 units more than the starter plan. So what is Bubble going to recommend here? Well, with the starter plan, I can expect to pay $7.50 extra, right? This is in overages. In order to cover that gap, in order to cover that 25,000 additional workload units. All right, and so my total for the month would be $39.50. Now, $39.50 is much better than jumping up to the growth plan, right, just to get that extra workload unit allowance. Okay, so it's very helpful to be able to see, what is going to be the most cost-effective combination given the plan that you need and your expected units. Right? So that extra is going to be covered with a lower overage payment compared to jumping up to a higher tier plan. All right, now let's jump up to, let's say, 500,000. Okay, I still want to be on the starter plan, but my application happens to use a lot of workload units, right? I don't need the features of the higher tier plans, but I do need a lot of workload units. Let's calculate this. All right, so here we have a new component called the workload tier. All right, so given I want to be on the starter plan, which is only going to give me 175,000 units, Bubble is recommending that I add what's called a workload tier to add an additional 200,000 workload units. This is on top of the 175. So this would give me a total of 375 workload units that I can use in the month. So this is an additional subscription that you're adding to your base subscription. And it says tier 1 here because Bubble actually has multiple tiers of different workload amounts. I think they go into the millions. So you're just going to want to choose the one that's most appropriate. This subscription planner will actually let you know what the best tier is. Okay, now 375 is still not enough to cover my estimated 500,000. So in addition to that extra workload tier, I can also expect to pay $18.75 to fill in the rest of that gap, right, between that 375 and the 500,000. And if you look at the total, right, for this month with all of these things combined, I'm looking at $79.75 a month to cover my 500,000 with this combination here. That $79.75 is still less than jumping up to the growth plan, which doesn't even cover the 500,000. And it is even more so, much more affordable compared to the team plan, which is where we start at, an included 500,000. Okay, again, this is a very helpful tool to help you understand the most cost-effective combination. And remember, if you need to start on the on a higher tier plan, let's see what happens here, right, with that 500,000. Okay, so the growth plan is going to give me 250. I'm still on tier 1 for an additional 200. So now I have a combination of 450 units. So I have an extra 50,000 that needs to be covered by overages. So the $7.50 is going to cover that. And so my monthly bill here is going to be $170.50, right? That's just a little bit more than the standard growth plan, significantly less than going to the team plan. All right, so definitely take a look at that. This is something that you're going to need to, that you're going to want to use as your usage increases. When you're first getting started with your application, you're not going to use a lot of units. Do not stress about this until you are ready to go live. When you're under construction and everything is new, things are going to be moving around quite a bit. The metrics tab is not going to be very accurate for you until you find stability with your application, until you start locking things down and you're not making as many major changes. Let's talk about testing your app. As you build your application, you'll be able to preview the page just as a user would. You're also going to get access to a special troubleshooting tool called the debugger. The debugger helps you inspect everything you've done on this page, everything from the visual properties, conditions, to your workflows that you can actually break down. You can think of this as kind of looking under the hood from the front end perspective to uncover mistakes, to uncover any issues that might not be as obvious from within the editor. So you'll definitely want to get comfortable with the debugger so that you can get really good at troubleshooting your own app. Once you're ready to go live with your application, there are a few things to be mindful of. First is you're going to need to be on a paid plan in order to access the live environment of your app. And this is the version that you want to share with real users. Another thing to be mindful of is once you're on a paid plan, you're going to be able to connect your app to a custom domain so that you can white label the URL. You can send email from your own domain name now. Okay. The other thing is be mindful of security and privacy. Once you go live and now it's out there with real users, you need to make sure that everything is locked down. Go through the editor settings and make sure that you've configured all of your privacy settings appropriately. This goes for privacy rules for users' access to data, as well as access to the application itself. Review any settings you have for collaborators, review any privacy settings around APIs. Okay. When you go live, you need to make sure that those things have been addressed. Make sure that you test those things as well. Run your application from different user perspectives to make sure you're not missing anything. Also, you won't be able to deploy your application until you've addressed and resolved all of the issues in your issue checker. So a very good habit to get into is to address issues as you go. It's very normal to carry issues as things are under construction, right? As you're actually building things out. But issues are there for a reason. They're speaking to misconfigured items in your work. So if you're testing your application while you have, 50 plus issues, you're likely not testing an accurate representation of your work, right? You want to address those things so that everything is correct. Not to mention, the last thing you want to do when you're ready to go live is to sit for hours addressing 100 plus issues. I've seen it. It is not fun. Don't get into that habit of just letting them build up on you. What you can do is after every development session, take a look at your issues, address as many as you can. You don't have to clear them all, but address as many as you can so that you keep that number down. And remember that you won't be able to deploy until you've addressed all issues. The items in the issue checker will typically carry a message to help you resolve it. It'll usually give you a tip on what the problem is and how to fix it. Now that you have a more well-rounded understanding on what you can do on this platform, I do want to take a moment and address some of the more advanced capabilities so that you know what to expect in the future. You probably won't need a lot of these right now, but it is helpful to know that you can really extend your app's reach to the outside world. This can help you create more robust systems, automations, right? Communications with third-party tools as well. So the first thing is that your app can actually expose two different APIs, a workflow API and a data API. This allows third-party systems to make a request to your app, server to server, to trigger workflows, as well as to retrieve data from your application. And all of this can be protected. You have various privacy settings that you can configure to make sure that only the right systems are able to access these things. But this is a huge help for creating integrations with third-party systems and creating automated flows. This is basically the system that Zapier uses to connect applications to one another, okay? Now, you also have the plugin marketplace. We touched on this a little earlier, but it bears repeating that, this plugin marketplace is huge, and there are many different tools that you can add to your app to have more variety in your visual elements, have more options for different workflow triggers and actions. Again, you do want to find a good balance of what you actually need. You don't want to be overly dependent on a whole bunch of plugins, but there's a lot to explore there that can really change, what your app does based on, your specific features and just customizing things further. One of the most popular plugins is the API connector. This is a special tool that allows you to create custom API connections with third-party systems that offer an API. If you're comfortable with APIs, I love this tool. I highly recommend it because it keeps you in control over your integrations. And another feature I want to call out real quick here, which is going to be useful for SaaS apps or anything that's multi-tenant in structure, especially for enterprise level productions, is the sub app feature. This is accessible on the higher tier paid plans, and essentially it lets you create copies of an application so that each tenant or each customer typically is onboarded onto its own application. This is really helpful if you need to meet certain industry requirements to keep that data completely separate. You can white label each app a little bit more so they can all be on their own custom domain. It can also help you control the amount of data that any single customer or tenant is producing. Your next step from here is to take what you've learned today and combine it with a strategic development methodology, because it's one thing to know how to use a tool, right? Bubble at the end of the day is just a tool, but it's a completely different story to build and launch an application successfully. You have to come at this with a programmer's mindset, even though there's no code involved. So head over to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. We've got a free additional training there where we're going to guide you through our 4-phased approach to go from idea to launching an application. We'll show you how to identify your priorities, how to roadmap your features on a timeline, how to work with user stories, and actually apply this all to your development so you're not wasting any time at all and you're building a real functioning application properly from the start for scale. Again, coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop is going to have that free additional training for you. We can't wait to see you there.